The message came in at 4 minutes past 3 in the morning, and I know that because I have spent my entire working life caring about exactly what time a thing was said. I was awake already. I am always awake at that hour now. The phone lit the ceiling of my bedroom a pale blue, and I reached over and turned it toward me, and I read what my daughter had written. "Mom, I know you paid for the house, but Vivian has asked that it just be the Rutherfords this year for Christmas Eve. Please don't make this a thing." I read it once. Then I set the phone face down on the nightstand and lay very still. Please don't make this a thing. 9 words at the end, and those 9 were the ones that went all the way through me. Not the disinvitation. I had felt that coming for months, the way you feel weather in your knees before the sky changes. It was the assumption underneath, that I would want to make a thing of it. That the trouble would begin with me, and not with the woman who had asked her son's wife to shut her own mother out of a house that mother had bought and paid for in cash. I picked the phone back up. I typed 1 word and sent it. Understood. Then I got out of bed without turning on a single light, and I stood at my window and looked down at Delaney Street at the wet black asphalt shining under the street lamp at the Okerlund's inflatable snowman across the way sagging halfway to the ground because they always forget to run the fan overnight. There were 7 days until Christmas Eve. There was a house 11 minutes north of me on Chandler Row that I had bought with money my husband died to leave behind, and I was not welcome in it. My name is Corinne Ashford. I am 63 years old. For 35 years, I worked as a court reporter in Allen County, Indiana, which means that I sat in a corner of a room with a machine in my lap, and I wrote down word for word exactly what other people said. I want you to understand what that work does to a person, because everything that comes after depends on it. A court reporter is the only one in the room who is not allowed to have a reaction. A man can be describing the worst hour of his life on the stand, and the lawyers can be circling him. And my job was to sit there with my hands moving and my face absolutely still and get it right. Not the gist of it. Not what he meant. What he said. Every I guess so. Every pause marked. I have taken down deathbed depositions in hospital rooms with a ventilator hissing behind me. I have taken down custody hearings where a mother said things about her own children that I still hear sometimes when I am trying to fall asleep. 35 years of sitting in the corner writing down what everyone else said. And I want to tell you something I never said out loud to anybody until I was 63 years old, standing at a window in the dark. In 35 years, not one single person ever wrote down what was said to me. That is not self-pity. That is a fact of the trade. But there comes a night when a fact of the trade stops being a fact and starts being the shape of your whole life. Because I had done it at home too. That was the thing I finally saw standing there at that window. I had made myself the person in the corner of my own family. Quiet. Accurate. Reacting to nothing. Getting it all down and never once entering the record myself. Let me back up because you cannot understand what I did unless you understand where the money came from. My husband was named Vaughn. He installed and serviced commercial refrigeration walk and coolers and freezer units for restaurants and groceries all over northeastern Indiana, and he was very good at it. And he loved it in the way some men love a thing that other people find dull. He would come home smelling of cold metal and describe a compressor to me at the dinner table like it was a person with a personality problem. That unit down at the Fairfield Market, Corinne, it has been sulking for a year, and today I found out why. He was 54 when he died. It was a Tuesday in April. He was in the truck on the way to a job in Auburn, and something in his heart simply stopped, and he had the presence of mind. In the last 30 seconds, he had to get the truck onto the shoulder and put it in park so that he would not hurt anybody. That is the part that tells you exactly who he was. 30 seconds left in a life, and he spent them making sure the rest of us were safe. Sabrina was 22. She had just finished her hygienist program. She came home from Indianapolis and slept in her childhood bed for 11 weeks, and I held her while she cried. And I did not cry myself, not once. Not in front of her because I was in the corner of the room getting it down. There was life insurance. Vaughn had carried more than we could really afford because he was the kind of man who thought about walk-in freezers and about what happens to his wife if the truck goes off the road. There was a modest settlement from a dispute over the company's coverage. And there was my own savings. 35 years of a job that paid decently and paid better when I took freelance deposition work on weekends, which I did constantly because I would rather work than sit in a quiet house. Altogether, it came to a little over $400,000. I did not touch it. Not for 11 years. It sat in accounts, and I looked at the statements every quarter the way you look at a photograph of someone you miss. That money was not money to me. That money was Vaughn standing on the shoulder of a county road with 30 seconds left, making sure nobody got hurt. You do not spend a thing like that on a kitchen remodel. I told myself it was for my old age, so that I would never be a burden on my daughter, so that when the time came that I could not manage the stairs, there would be somewhere decent for me to go, and I would pay for it myself, and nobody would have to have a conversation about what to do with Mom. That was the plan. I want you to remember that that was the plan because of what I did with it instead. Sabrina brought Dale Rutherford to meet me on a Sunday in the fall, 3 years after she had moved back to Fort Wayne and taken a chair at a practice on DuPont Road. She had been dating him 4 months, and I had heard the name in that particular tone daughters use when they have already decided. I made pot roast because it was the only thing I made that I was genuinely confident about, and I put out the good plates, and I was so nervous I set the table twice. I was easy to like. I will say that honestly because it matters. Dale was 33, then tall big hands, a beard he kept neat, and he came in with a bottle of something he had brewed himself, and a way of asking questions that made you feel he actually wanted the answer. He owned a tap room on the south side of downtown called Hollow Bell in a converted auto parts warehouse with the original brick. He talked about it the way Vaughn had talked about compressors. I remember thinking with a kind of relief that embarrasses me now, oh good, she found one of the good ones. Sabrina squeezed my hand across the table when he went to the bathroom and said, Mom, say something. I said I think your father would have liked him. She teared up. That was the last time I said something to my daughter that landed exactly where I meant it to land. 2 weeks later, they asked me to dinner at Dale's parents' house so the families could meet. The Rutherfords lived out on the northwest side, in a development with a stone entrance sign and a pond with a fountain in it, in a house with a 2-story foyer and a curved staircase and a chandelier that I could not stop looking at. Vivienne Rutherford opened the door in a cream-colored sweater set and pearls with silver hair cut in a way that had clearly been maintained by an appointment every 4 weeks for 30 years, and she took my hand for exactly as long as courtesy required. Corinne, she said, what a treat. Sabrina has told us so much. And you drove all the way from where is it, the South End? I said Delaney Street, near the park. Oh, she said, how practical. I want to be fair to her, at least at the start, because I think fairness is the only thing that makes a story like this worth telling. Vivienne Rutherford was not a monster that night. She was a good hostess. The food was excellent. She asked about my work and listened to the answer for almost a full minute. But there was a moment early when we were all standing in that enormous foyer with drinks, and Hollis Rutherford Dale's father, a big soft-spoken man in a cardigan, asked me what I did. I said I am a court reporter. I take down testimony. And Vivienne said brightly, oh, so you type. The room did not go quiet. Nobody noticed. Dale was laughing at something Sabrina said. Hollis was already asking me a follow-up question, a kind one, about whether it was hard to keep up. And I said something pleasant, and the evening rolled on. So you type. I have taken down the testimony of a man who built a bridge, and the testimony of the man who was crushed under it. I can write at 240 words a minute and hold it for hours. There is a certification for it, and there are people who wash out of the program in the first semester, and I passed it on the first attempt at 23 years old with a baby on my hip. And I stood in that foyer holding a glass of wine, and I did not say one word of that because it was my daughter's night, and I was in the corner of the room getting it down. That is the first entry in the record. Remember it. Everything that came after was just that same sentence said 100 different ways over 3 years. On the drive home, Sabrina called me from Dale's car and said Mom wasn't that great. Vivienne loved you. And I said they were very gracious. And I hung up and drove the rest of the way with the radio off. Before I go on, I want to ask you something because I have wondered about it for 2 years now, and I have never had anyone to ask. Has anyone ever said a small thing to you, so small that you could not possibly repeat it to another person without sounding petty, and had it sit in you for years? If you know what I mean, tell me in the comments. I think there are more of us than anybody admits. They were married the following June. I paid for the dress. $2,200, and Sabrina cried in the fitting room, and I would pay it again tomorrow. Vivienne handled the reception, which was at a country club with a stone terrace overlooking the 18th hole, and it was beautiful, and I have never once said otherwise. At the reception, Dale stood up with a microphone and thanked people. He thanked his mother for making the day happen. He thanked his father. He thanked his groomsmen. He thanked Vivienne a second time, actually, for what he called her unbelievable eye. I did not thank me. I do not believe he did it on purpose. I have thought about this for years, and I have landed there and stayed. Dale Rutherford was not cruel. Dale Rutherford was a man who had been raised in a house where his mother was the sun and the rest of us were things the light fell on or did not. He simply did not think of me, which, if you want to know the truth, is worse than if he had. Sabrina found my eyes from the head table. Her face went stricken for about 2 seconds. I lifted my glass to her, and I smiled and I mouthed, "It's fine. It's fine." 2 words. I have said them so many times that I could probably tell you the exact number if I had been keeping a transcript of my own life, which, as we have established, nobody was. They rented a 2-bedroom apartment off Coliseum Boulevard for the first year. It was cramped and the radiator banged, and they were happy. We had a standing coffee on Sunday mornings at a place near the library, and we would sit for 2 hours, and she would tell me about patients with terrible flossing habits, and I would tell her about a deposition where a man cried about a boat. That was the last normal year of my life, and I did not know it, which is how those years always go. Then on a Saturday in February, they asked me to lunch. Not coffee. Lunch at a restaurant with a reservation. And when I sat down and saw the 2 of them across the table, with their hands folded in exactly the same way, I knew something was coming, and I felt my stomach do the thing it does. Mom Sabrina said we want to buy a house. I said, "That's wonderful, honey." And then Dale started talking and did not really stop for 11 minutes. About the brewery. About the second location he had signed a letter of intent on. About how the bank looked at business debt. About how the 2 of them could carry a mortgage payment fine easily, but the down payment was the wall, and the market in Aldergate was moving. And there was a house. There was this house. Aldergate. Everybody in Fort Wayne knows Aldergate. 11 blocks of old money that stopped being money around 1960 and came back around 2005. Brick streets, gas lamps that are not really gas anymore. 100-year-old trees that arch all the way over the road, so that in July you drive through a green tunnel. When I was a girl, my mother used to drive us through Aldergate in December to look at the decorations, and I would press my face to the window. Sabrina reached across the table and put her hand on mine. "Mom, we wouldn't ask. You know we wouldn't ask." I said, "How much do you need?" She said the number. $338,000. I set my fork down. That was not a down payment. That was a house. That was the entire purchase price of 14-12 Chandler Row in cash, as is no financing contingency, which was exactly why the seller would take it, and exactly why it had to be that number. Dale said quickly, "And we would pay you back." Obviously. We'd do it as a formal thing. We'd put together a schedule. Sabrina said, "Mom, it would be an investment. It's Aldergate. It only goes up." And I sat there in that restaurant with my hands in my lap, and I thought about a man on the shoulder of a county road putting a truck in park with 30 seconds left. I thought this is what he left it for. Not for a bed in a facility somewhere in 20 years. For his daughter to have a house with a tree in front of it. I said, "Let me think about it." And Sabrina's face fell about 1/4 of an inch, just enough for me to see it. And she said, "Of course, Mom, take all the time you need." I called her on Tuesday and said yes. Now here is the part where I need you to not be too hard on me, because I have been hard enough on myself for both of us. I want you to know that I was not stupid. I did not hand over $338,000 because I was a soft old woman who could not say no. I said yes because for 11 years I had been carrying that money like a stone in my coat, and it had never once made me feel anything but the day Vaughn died. And the idea that it could turn into a porch and a maple tree and a room where my grandchildren would eventually sleep, the idea that Vaughn's 30 seconds could become 100 years of somebody's family, that idea got into me, and I could not put it down. I did not do it because I could not refuse. I did it because I wanted to be part of something that, as it turned out, was the actual mistake. And it took me 2 years and a forged signature to understand the difference. We walked through 1412 Chandler Row on a Saturday morning in March before the sale, when it was still empty and smelled like cold plaster and old varnish. It was a 4-square built in 1911, red brick with a wide front porch and a dormer, and inside there were pocket doors and a staircase with a newel post the size of a fire hydrant. 3 bedrooms upstairs, a dining room with a built-in china cabinet, 10-foot ceilings that made your voice sound different, and out back at the end of a brick drive, there was a carriage house. It had been the garage and the hayloft in 1911, and somebody in the 1980s had turned the upper floor into an apartment. Maybe 600 square feet, 1 bedroom, a little kitchen, a bathroom with an old clawfoot tub and windows on 3 sides that looked into the branches of a hackberry tree. Sabrina took me out there last. She held the door open and she was practically vibrating. "Mom," she said, "this is yours." I stood in the doorway and did not go in. She said, "No, I mean it." We talked about it. Dale and I talked about it for a week before we even asked you about the house. It's yours, not a guest room, not come stay whenever, yours. You keep your things here. You have a key. Nobody goes in without asking you. Dale was leaning against the doorframe behind her, and he said, "Corinne, we'd be honored." And that was the first time he ever called me Corinne instead of Mrs. Ashford, and I noticed it, and it landed. I walked into the middle of that little room and turned around once slowly and looked out at the hackberry branches. I thought about my apartment on Delaney Street. It is a fine apartment. It is clean and it is mine, and the landlord is decent. But I had lived in it for 11 years, and every single thing in it was a thing I had brought there alone. And I thought, all right. So this is what it looks like when you are still part of something at 61. I said I would like that very much. Sabrina hugged me so hard my glasses went crooked. I have gone back to that morning more times than is good for me. I have taken it apart. I have asked myself whether she meant it. And here is where I have landed, and it is not the answer that would make this story simpler. I think she meant it completely. I think on that Saturday in March, standing in a room full of dust and light, my daughter fully intended to give her mother a place in the world. I think meaning it was never the problem. Meaning it is easy. Holding to it when a woman in pearls starts telling you that you have made a peculiar choice that is the part almost nobody manages. I went to see Bernice Kaplan before the closing. Bernice had done Vaughn's estate in my will, and she is the only lawyer I have ever had. She is a small woman with reading glasses on a beaded chain and an office above a bakery on Wells Street, and she has a way of listening with her chin down that makes you tell her the whole thing instead of the version you rehearsed. I told her the number. She wrote it on a legal pad and underlined it twice. She said, "Corinne, whose name is going on the deed." I said I assumed all three of us. She took her glasses off. She said, "I am going to tell you what I tell everybody, and then I am going to tell you what I am telling you. What I tell everybody is that when one party provides 100% of the consideration, the deed should reflect it at least at first. What I am telling you is that this is not a down payment you are making. This is the whole house. This is every dollar Vaughn left you and a great deal of what you earned yourself. If you put their names on that deed, you have not bought a house. You have made a gift of $338,000, and you will need to file a federal gift tax return to report it, and it will be gone, and you will have no standing of any kind if anything ever goes sideways. I said, "Bernice, it's my daughter." She said, "I know it is. That is why I am saying it slowly." She said, "Take title in your own name alone. Sole ownership. Let them live there. Let them pay the utilities. Let them mow the lawn. Let them hang whatever they want on the walls. Give it 2 years. If in 2 years everything is exactly as lovely as it looks today, come back and we will do the transfer properly, and it will not cost you a nickel in actual tax because of the lifetime exclusion. But do not do it on day one." I said I feel like a terrible mother, and Bernice Kaplan looked at me over the top of her glasses and said the sentence I have thought about most often in the last 2 years. She said, "Corinne, protecting yourself is not an accusation against somebody else. It is just a fact about you." I did not understand that in March. I understood it in December. So the deed went in my name. Corinne A. Ashford, a widow sole owner. Sabrina and Dale were not on it in any capacity. There was no lease. There was no rent. There was no written agreement of any kind about what they were, which will matter enormously later, so hold on to it. I told Sabrina in her kitchen on Chandler Row, while the movers were still bringing things in. I had rehearsed it 4 times in the car, and I was so nervous my hands were cold. She said, "Mom, that's completely fair. It's your money. When we pay you back, we'll do the whole thing properly." She said it easily. She said it while she was unwrapping glasses from newspaper. She meant it. 20 minutes later, I went out to the front porch to get a box, and Dale was on the porch swing with his phone to his ear and his back to me, and he did not hear the screen door because it did not latch yet. He was saying, "No, Mom. No," her name. Then I know that. Then because her lawyer told her to, that's why. It's not personal. Then a long pause, and then in a lower voice, "Look, without her, there is no house. So we're going to be nice about it." I stepped back inside and let the screen door close very quietly, and I went and got the box from the other side of the room instead. We're going to be nice about it. I did not tell Sabrina. I did not bring it up with Dale. I stood in a kitchen with a box of wine glasses in my arms, and I made a decision that I would remake 10,000 times over the next 2 years, which was that I would hear a thing and not enter it into the record. That is how it starts if anybody ever asks you. Not with a betrayal. With a screen door that does not latch and a woman who decides to be pleasant. Over the next 8 months, I bought them a refrigerator, a washer and dryer, half of a sectional sofa, and all of a mattress. And I gave them my grandmother's dining table, a heavy oak thing that seats 10 with both leaves and which had been in storage for 11 years because it did not fit in the apartment on Delaney Street. The movers set it up in the dining room at Chandler Row under the light fixture with the frosted globes, and Sabrina put her hands over her mouth, and I said, "Now you can have everybody at once." There is one more thing about that first year, and it is the most boring thing in this entire story, and it is also the thing that ended up mattering most, so please stay with me. At the closing, the title company asked where the tax bills and the insurance should be sent. Because I was the owner, they were sent to me. Corinne Ashford, 1140 Delaney Street. I meant to change it. I thought I will get them set up on their own account after the first year once they have their feet under them. I never did. So every May and every November for 2 years, the Allen County Treasurer sent me a property tax bill for 1412 Chandler Row, and I paid it out of my own checking account. And every March, the homeowner's policy renewed in my name, and I paid the premium out of my own checking account. 2 years, 4 tax installments, 2 annual premiums, every one of them drawn on an account with my name on it, and nobody else's. Not once in 2 years did either of them say, "Hey, who's handling the taxes?" I think they assumed it was somehow included the way people assume the water in the river came from somewhere. It came from me. And there was a paper trail, and I did not build it on purpose. I built it by being a woman who pays a bill when a bill arrives. I want you to remember that, because in December, a lawyer looked at 2 years of those receipts spread across a desk and told me what they actually were. The first time I went to stay in my carriage house was in October, 7 months after they moved in. I had been putting it off, which I did not admit to myself. I told myself I did not want to intrude while they were settling. The truth is that I was waiting to be asked, and I had been waiting a long time, and I finally decided that a woman who has been given a key does not need to wait to be asked. I called on Thursday and said I thought I might come Saturday and stay the night. Sabrina said, "Oh, great. Yeah, that would be great, Mom." I baked a sour cream coffee cake Saturday morning because it travels well, and I put an overnight bag in the car, and I drove up to Chandler Row at 2 in the afternoon with the windows down, because it was one of those October days that Indiana gives you about 4 of. Dale's truck was in the drive. So was a silver sedan I did not recognize. Sabrina opened the front door before I got to the top step, and she had a look on her face that I can only describe as pre-apologizing. "Mom, hi. So Vivian's here." I said, "That's fine, honey." And then, because I did not want to stand in a doorway, I said, "I'll just take my bag out back and get settled and come say hello." And Sabrina said, "Mom, wait." And that was how I found out. She said it fast, the way you pull a bandage. Vivian's been staying in the carriage house, just for a while. Their kitchen is being redone, the whole thing, they gutted it, and she can't stand the dust. Hollis is fine with it, but her sinuses, and it's only been about 3 weeks, and it's really more like 6 more weeks, and then it's done, and I should have told you I was going to tell you. I stood on that porch with a coffee cake in a Pyrex dish in both hands. I said 3 weeks. She said, "Mom, please don't. It's not a thing. She'll be out by Christmas." Don't make this a thing. I had never heard the phrase before that afternoon. I would hear it again in a text message at 3 in the morning, 14 months later. I said, "Of course. Of course, that's the sensible thing." And I carried my overnight bag back to the car and put it in the trunk, and I carried the coffee cake into the house, and I went out to the yard because I wanted to see it. The carriage house had white curtains in the windows now. There was a wicker chair on the little landing at the top of the outside stairs with a folded throw blanket over the arm. There was a ceramic pot of chrysanthemums, and the hackberry tree had been cut back hard on the south side so that the branches no longer came near the windows, because Vivian Rutherford does not care for the sound of branches. I stood at the bottom of those stairs in the yard of the house I had paid for, and I looked up at the curtains in the windows of the room my daughter had told me was mine, and I want to tell you what I felt, and it was not rage. Rage would have been useful. What I felt was embarrassment. I was embarrassed. Of myself. For having driven over with an overnight bag like a woman with somewhere to be. Vivian came out onto the landing while I was standing there, a cardigan around her shoulders and a mug in her hand. She said, "Corinne, Sabrina said you'd come by. Isn't this place charming? I have completely fallen in love with it." I said, "I'm glad you're comfortable." And she smiled down at me from the landing and said, "You know, it's the funniest thing. I had no idea this was even back here. Sabrina never mentioned it." That is the sentence. Out of everything anybody said to me in 2 years, that is the one I would put in the record if I could only enter one. Sabrina never mentioned it. I ate dinner with them that night. Vivian stayed for dinner too, and she and Dale and Sabrina talked about the kitchen renovation, about whether the backsplash should go to the ceiling, and I sat at my grandmother's oak table in a chair at the end, and I said the appropriate things at the appropriate times. Nobody ate the coffee cake. It went in the refrigerator under plastic wrap. I drove home at 9 o'clock. My overnight bag was still in the trunk. I brought it inside and I set it on the bed, and I did not unpack it for 6 days, and I could not have told you why. 6 weeks became Christmas. Christmas became spring. In April, Sabrina mentioned in passing that Hollis and Vivian had decided to just leave the guest room set up out back since Vivian came over so often anyway, and it saved her the drive. I never stayed one night in the carriage house. Not one. In 2 years, I never slept a single night at 1412 Chandler Row. The second year is harder to tell you about because nothing happened in it. That is the nature of the thing. No incident, no fight. Just a slow, courteous, almost gentle removal conducted entirely by way of scheduling. Our Sunday coffee ended in February, not with a conversation, with 3 cancellations in a row, and then a 4th, and then it simply was not a thing we did anymore. When I finally asked about it in April, she said, "Oh, Mom, Sunday's gotten crazy. We do brunch with Dale's parents now. It's kind of their tradition." I said, "That sounds nice. Could I come sometime?" She said, "It's really more of a Vivian thing." It's really more of a Vivian thing. I wrote that one down. Not on paper, but I wrote it down. I started bringing food. Chili in the fall and chicken and noodles, which is the one dish Sabrina has loved since she was 4 years old. For a while, she was glad. Then, one afternoon in October, I came by with a dish, and she met me on the porch and did not open the door all the way, and said, "Mom, you really don't have to keep doing this, honestly. Vivian brings so much stuff the fridge is packed." And I looked past her and saw on the counter 3 glass containers with white labels printed in a nice font. Vivian's white bean and kale. Vivian's lemon orzo. My chicken and noodles was in a plastic Tupperware with a lid that did not match. I said, "All right, honey." And I drove home and ate chicken and noodles for 6 days. In August, Sabrina turned 33 and I planned something. I made a reservation at a place downtown she had loved since she was in high school, the one with the murals. And I invited her 2 closest friends, and my sister Nadine and Dale and I sent it out 10 days ahead. Sabrina called me that same night. "Mom, that is so sweet, but Vivian already booked the club for that Saturday. She's doing a whole thing. It's kind of a surprise, so please act surprised." I said, "Honey, I sent mine 10 days ago." She said, "I know, but hers has a caterer, Mom. She put down a deposit." I said, "So did I." There was a silence on that phone call. It lasted about 3 seconds, and I have thought about it approximately 900 times. And then she said, "Mom, please don't make this hard." I said, "Of course not. Go to the club. I'll cancel mine." I lost a $120 deposit. That is not the part that mattered. I had bought her a gift. It was a thin gold chain with a small flat disc on it, and I had had the disc engraved on the back where nobody but her would ever see it with the date her father died. Because she had said to me once years ago that she was afraid she would forget the exact day, and it had broken my heart. I put it back in the box, and I put the box in the drawer of my nightstand, and it stayed there. On the Sunday after the party, she texted me a photo. A long table on a terrace, string lights, Vivian standing behind Sabrina with both hands on her shoulders, everybody's mouth open in a laugh. "Missed you, Mom. It was so nice," Vivian outdid herself. "Love you." I wrote back, "Happy birthday, my girl. I love you more than you know." Both of those sentences were true, and neither of them was the truth. Now we come to December, and I need to get the days right, because the days are the whole thing. The first week of December, I called Sabrina about Christmas. We had always done Christmas Eve. Always. Since she was 3 years old and Vaughn was alive. Christmas Eve was ours, cornbread dressing and a ham and the radio on, and after he died, it stayed ours, just the 2 of us, and that had been the one fixed point in 11 years. She said, "Mom, so Vivian wants to do Christmas Eve at our place. An open house thing. She's inviting the whole street." I said, "At Chandler Row." She said, "Yeah, the house is perfect for it. The layout and her place is torn up, and it would be so good for the neighborhood. You know, we've never really done anything." I said, "Well, all right, I'll bring the dressing." And she said, "Oh, Vivian's doing all the food. She's got it catered, actually. So you don't need to bring anything. You don't need to bring anything." I said, "All right, honey, what time?" And she said 7, and we hung up. And I sat in my kitchen and understood distantly the way you understand a diagnosis before you have really absorbed it, that I had just been told there was no longer a place at that table for anything of mine. That was the first week of December. On the 15th of December at 4 minutes past 3 in the morning, my phone lit up the ceiling, and my daughter told me that Vivian had asked that it just be Rutherford's. And I typed understood and I stood at the window, and that is where this began. Now I am going to tell you what happened on the 16th and the 17th. On the 16th, my sister Nadine called me at 4 in the afternoon, and her voice was wrong. "Corinne, are you sitting down?" I said, "Nadine, I am 63 years old. I have taken down 2 homicide trials. Just tell me." She said I was at the Kroger on Coldwater last night, and Sabrina was there, with Vivian. They were in the aisle with the wrapping paper, and I was going to go say hello. She stopped. I said, "Nadine." She said Vivian was talking about you, and Sabrina let her. I said, "Tell me exactly what was said. Not the sense of it, the words. Because that is what I do. That is what I have always done." And my sister, God bless her, knew me well enough to just close her eyes and give it to me. She said, "Vivian said, sweetheart, I'm going to be blunt. Having your mother at these things is difficult for everyone." She said, "I don't dislike her. She's perfectly nice. She just doesn't fit, and she knows she doesn't fit, and it's uncomfortable to watch." She said she sits there like a little brown bird, and everyone has to work around her. A little brown bird. Nadine said, "Corinne, are you there?" I said, "And what did Sabrina say?" And Nadine started to cry, which Nadine does not do. She said, "I know. She said, I know Vivian, but she's my mother. I can't exactly tell her not to come. I can't exactly tell her not to come." I stood in my kitchen with the phone against my ear, and I looked at the calendar magnet on my refrigerator, and I did a piece of arithmetic that took less than a second. Nadine had been at the Kroger on the night of the 15th. The text had come at 3:04 in the morning on the 15th, which meant that my daughter had told her mother-in-law on the evening of the 15th that she could not exactly tell me not to come, 20 hours after she already had. I said, "Nadine, thank you. I mean that. Thank you for telling me exactly." And I hung up and I stood there, and for the first time in 2 years, I felt something that was not hurt. It was cold and it was clean, and it came up through me like water finding a crack. She had already done it. And then she had stood in a grocery store and let a woman call me a little brown bird and had not said actually Vivian. I handled it, because she did not want credit for it, because she wanted to be the good daughter in the aisle and the obedient one in the text and never have to be either one out loud. I did not sleep that night. I sat in my living room with one lamp on and went back through 2 years the way I used to go back through a transcript, looking for the place where a witness changed their story. Every cancellation. Every "it's more of a Vivian" thing. Every "please don't make this a thing." And around 4 in the morning, I asked myself a question that I had never once asked in 2 years. Why now? Vivian had looked down on me from the first night in a foyer over a glass of wine. That was not new. Snobbery is not urgent. Snobbery sits in a chair and says, "Oh, so you type," and then it goes back to its evening. What had been coming at me for the last 4 months was not snobbery. It was a schedule. It was a woman in a hurry. And people do not hurry unless they need something. I did not have an answer. I wrote the question on the back of an envelope and left it on the kitchen table. The next afternoon, the 17th of December, the mail came. It was the usual junk and a water bill, and one thing that was not usual, an envelope from the City of Fort Wayne Aldergate Historic Preservation Commission, sent certified with a green card I had signed for at the door. I opened it standing up in the front hall with my coat still on. It was a notice of public hearing. It said that an application for a certificate of appropriateness had been received for the property at 1412 Chandler Row, and that, as the owner of record, I was hereby notified of the hearing date, and that a copy of the submitted application was enclosed for my records. I turned the page. The application requested approval to remove the exterior rear staircase of the accessory structure, install a permanent covered entry in large 2-window openings on the north elevation, and construct a paved parking pad and a walkway connecting the accessory structure to the alley. They wanted to give the carriage house its own entrance, its own parking, its own way in and out without ever having to go through the main house. That is not a guest room. Nobody builds a private entrance and a parking pad for a guest. That is what you build for somebody who is moving in permanently. And then I got to the last page, which was the signature page where the applicant certifies under penalty of perjury that they are the owner of the property or the owner's authorized agent. And there on the line marked owner of record in blue ink was my name, Corinne A. Ashford. I stood in my front hall in my coat, and I held that page up toward the window, and I looked at it for a long, long time, because I have looked at signatures professionally for 35 years. Because I have sat in 100 depositions about disputed documents. Because that is a thing I actually know how to do. And the C was wrong. I do not make a loop coming out of the C. I never have. My mother taught me, and my mother did not make a loop, and neither do I. Whoever wrote that name on that line had looked at my signature and copied it carefully, the way you copy something you have seen 100 times on birthday cards, and they had put a small soft loop coming out of the C that has never in 63 years come off the end of my pen. I did not sit down. I did not cry. I did not call anybody. I walked into my kitchen with that page in my hand, and I picked up the envelope off the table, the one where I had written "Why now?" and I turned it over and I wrote underneath it in pen 3 more words. Somebody forged me. And I want you to understand something about me at that exact moment, standing in a kitchen in a coat at 4:30 in the afternoon on the 17th of December. For 35 years, I sat in the corner of the room and wrote down what everyone else said and never once entered the record myself. That ended in the front hall of a 2-bedroom apartment on Delaney Street. Because a signature is a person entering the record. That is all a signature has ever been. It is a human being saying, "This is me, I was here, I agreed to this." And somebody had taken mine. I called Bernice Kaplan at 5 o'clock, and her assistant said she was with a client, and could she take a message. I said tell her Corinne Ashford needs an hour tomorrow morning and tell her to clear it. I was at Bernice Kaplan's office at 8:30 the next morning, which was Thursday the 18th of December, with a bakery box in one hand, because the bakery is on the ground floor, and it seemed rude not to. I had brought a Redweld folder. Inside it was the deed, the closing statement, the wire confirmation for $338,000, 4 property tax receipts, 2 insurance declarations pages, and the certified letter from the Aldergate Historic Preservation Commission with the application attached. Bernice cleared her desk with one sweep of her forearm and said, "All right, show me." I laid it out the way I would have marked exhibits, left to right in order. She put her glasses on and she did not say anything for 11 minutes. I know it was 11 minutes because there is a clock on her wall, and I watched it because I am the kind of person who watches the clock. Then she took the glasses off and set them on the desk and folded her hands. She said, "Corinne, I want to tell you 4 things, and I want you to let me finish all 4 before you react to any of them." I said, "All right." She said 1. You are the sole owner of 14 to 12 Chandler Row, not a co-owner, not a partial owner, not an owner subject to somebody's interest. You are the only human being on the face of the earth with an ownership interest in that property, and there is nothing recorded against it. No mortgage, no lien, no memorandum of any agreement. It is clean. She said 2. Your daughter and her husband have no ownership interest of any kind and never have. No deed, no contract, no lease, no written promise, not even a text message in which you said the words, "I will give you this house," and I have asked you that 4 separate times over 2 years, and the answer has always been no. What they have is permission. In Indiana, when a person occupies real property with the owner's consent and pays no rent under no written agreement, that person is a tenant at will. And a tenancy at will is exactly what it sounds like. It exists at the will of the owner. She said 3, and she put 2 fingers on the stack of tax receipts and slid it toward me an inch. She said, "These are the most important pieces of paper on this desk." I said, "They're just tax bills, Bernice." She said, "No, listen to me. Every year for 2 years, the Allen County Treasurer sent the tax bill to Corinne Ashford at 1140 Delaney Street, and Corinne Ashford paid it out of Corinne Ashford's checking account. Every year for 2 years, the homeowner's policy renewed in the name of Corinne Ashford, sole owner, and Corinne Ashford paid the premium out of Corinne Ashford's checking account. 0 payments from Sabrina. 0 payments from Dale. Not $1, not one time in 24 months. She said if a lawyer for the other side ever tried to argue, there was some family understanding, some implied agreement, some oral promise, these receipts kill it in 4 minutes. Because this is not what shared ownership looks like. This is what an owner looks like, and this is what her guests look like. You did not build this record on purpose, which is exactly why it is so good. Nobody manufactures 2 years of consistent conduct. I sat there and I thought about opening the mail in November and writing a check without much noticing. She said 4. And she picked up the Historic Commission application and turned it to the signature page and put it down in front of me. She said, "Is that your signature?" I said, "No." She said, "Are you certain?" I said, "Bernice, I am a court reporter. I have sat through 9 document authentication fights. The C is wrong. I do not make a loop coming off the C. My mother did not make a loop, and I do not make a loop, and whoever wrote that has seen my name on Christmas cards and copied it and put a loop on it because they think that is what old ladies do." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Corinne, do you understand what that piece of paper is?" I said, "It is somebody wanting to put a door on the carriage house." She said, "No, that is what it says." What it is a written instrument submitted to a unit of local government bearing a certification under penalty of perjury that the person signing is the owner of record, signed with the name of a person who did not sign it. In Indiana, that is forgery. Indiana Code 354352. It is a Level 6 felony. It does not matter that the project is small. It does not matter that they meant well. It does not matter that they are family. The elements are the elements. I did not say anything for a while. Then I said, Bernice, why would they do that? It is a permit application for a staircase. They could have just called me. I would have said yes. I would have said yes to a door. And Bernice Kaplan looked at me across that desk, and she said the thing that changed the direction of the whole month. She said, Corinne, that is the right question, and it is not the one you think it is. Ask it again, but ask it about all of it. I said, I don't follow. She said you came in here with a forged signature, and I understand why that is the loud thing. But that is not the strange thing. The strange thing is the timing. When did the carriage house become permanent? When did the food start showing up? When did Sunday coffee die? When did the birthday get taken? When did a woman who had been merely rude to you for 2 years suddenly need you gone by a specific date? She said you told me the phrase you keep hearing is don't make this a thing. That is not the language of somebody who dislikes you. That is the language of somebody working against a deadline. She said, give me until tomorrow. I want to look at something. I said, look at what? She said, public records. Nothing improper. Everything I am going to look at any citizen with a library card can look at. I just know where the drawers are. I said, all right. And then I said, Bernice, before I go, if I wanted to, legally, what can I actually do? She put her glasses back on, which I have learned is what she does when she is about to be very precise. She said you can do essentially anything an owner can do. You can live in it. You can rent it. You can sell it. You can borrow against it. And because they are tenants at will with no lease, you can end their occupancy with proper written notice, and if they do not go with a possessory action in the small claims division. She said, but I want to be very clear about one thing. That is what you can do. It is not what you should do. Not today. Today you have a rude family and a forged permit application. Let me find out what else there is. I drove home the long way down Chandler Row, which I had not done in months. The house looked wonderful. A wreath on the door with a red velvet bow candles in every window. The porch rail wrapped in garland. Somebody had strung lights all the way up the maple in the parkway. And out back at the end of the brick drive, the carriage house had a wreath on its door, too. I did not slow down. I went home and sat in my car in the parking lot for a while with the engine off. Bernice called me at 11:40 the next morning, Friday the 19th. She said, are you somewhere you can sit down? I said, Bernice, everybody keeps asking me that. I am always sitting down. I sat down for a living. She did not laugh, which told me everything. She said there is a foreclosure action pending against Hollis and Vivian Rutherford. It was filed in Allen Superior Court on the 11th of September. The plaintiff is a mortgage servicer. The property is their residence out on the northwest side. I did not say anything. She said, Corinne, this is not a small thing. That house is mortgaged to the ceiling. A first mortgage and a home equity line taken out 4 years ago, and the numbers are in the complaint because they have to be. They are behind by a great deal. The loss mitigation review failed. There is a hearing set for the second week of January. Unless something changes, and I do not see what would those people are going to lose that house in the first quarter of next year. I stood in my kitchen with the phone against my ear. September the 11th. I did the arithmetic the way I had done it 2 days before, and it took about the same amount of time, which is to say none. The kitchen renovation that put Vivian in my carriage house had started 14 months earlier. That was cover or it was true and became cover, it does not much matter. But the hurry, the actual hurry, the thing that had been coming at me since the fall, like a car with its lights off that had a date now, the 11th of September. That was the month Vivian Rutherford found out that she was going to be a woman without a house. And what does a woman without a house need? She needs somewhere to land. Not a rental, not an apartment. Something that does not require a credit check and does not have a landlord and does not humiliate her, because for Vivian Rutherford being humiliated is worse than being poor. She needs a beautiful old carriage house in Aldergate behind her son's beautiful old home with white curtains and chrysanthemums, and God willing its own private entrance and its own parking pad, so that she never has to walk through anybody's kitchen like a guest. And standing between her and that arrangement, holding the deed, was one plain, quiet 63-year-old woman who had been told the carriage house was hers. I said, Bernice. She said, I know. I said she is not being cruel to me because she dislikes me. She is being cruel to me because I am in the way. Bernice said, that is my read. And Corinne, I want you to hear how much better that is for you. I said better. She said yes. Because if she simply disliked you, there would be nothing to do about it. You cannot litigate somebody's opinion. But a person who needs something from you is a person who has to act. And people who have to act make records. She said I would like to keep pulling. Is that all right with you? I said pull everything. I know how this sounds so far. It sounds like a woman collecting grievances, and I have listened to enough testimony to know that a person who has been badly treated can start assembling a case out of things that were never a case. So I want to be honest about where I was on the evening of Friday the 19th of December. I was not planning anything. I had a folder and a phone number for a lawyer and a great deal of pain, and I had not made a single decision. I still believed that Friday night that there was some version of this where I called my daughter and said, "Honey, somebody signed my name," and she said, "Mom." Oh my God, what? And it all came apart into a misunderstanding. I was still hoping. 63 years old with 2 years of evidence in a red-welled folder, and I was still hoping. If you have ever hoped past the point where hoping made sense, tell me. I would like to know I am not the only one. Saturday the 20th, I was at the hardware store on Broadway buying furnace filters when my phone rang with a number I did not know, a local area code. I almost let it go. A young woman's voice, very pleasant, very fast. "Hi, is this Corinne Ashford?" I said it is. She said, "Hi, Miss Ashford. This is Bryn calling from Meridian Mobile Notary and Signing. I'm just doing my confirmation calls for next week. I have you down for Saturday the 27th at 10 in the morning, and I just want to verify the signing location." I stood in the aisle at the hardware store with a furnace filter under my arm. I said, "I'm sorry. I think you may have the wrong Corinne Ashford." She said, "Oh, let me check. Hang on." And I heard keys clicking. She said, "So I have the file listed under the Chandler Row property in Aldergate, and the ordering party is Dale Rutherford. It's a quitclaim deed, and it's got one signer, Corinne A. Ashford, grantor. He indicated you'd be signing at the property, but I just wanted to confirm before I route the notary. I have been in rooms where a verdict was read. I have been in a room where a man learned what his own son had said about him under oath. I know what it sounds like when the temperature of a room changes. That happened in the seasonal aisle of a hardware store on Broadway. I said, and I heard my own voice come out completely level, "Could you tell me the date it was ordered?" She said, "Sure, it was placed on the, let's see, the 9th, December 9th. The 9th of December, 6 days before my daughter texted me at 3 in the morning to tell me not to come." I said, "And what is the fee?" She said it's $195 for a mobile signing with recording service, and the ordering party has already paid it. I said, "Bryn, thank you. I think there has been a mix-up on our end about the date. Let me speak with my family and we will call you back to confirm." She said, "No problem at all, Ms. Ashford, and have a wonderful holiday." I said, "And you." And I hung up and I stood in that aisle, and then I very carefully put the furnace filter back on the shelf because I did not trust myself to carry a thing to a register. Let me tell you what a quitclaim deed is, because I did not fully know until Bernice explained it to me, an hour later, and everything in this story turns on it. When you sell a house, there are 40 pieces of paper. A purchase agreement, a title search, a closing statement, money moving 100 things that have to be true. A quitclaim deed is 1 page. It says, "I, the person named here, hereby quitclaim to this other person all of my right, title, and interest in the following described real estate." There is a legal description, a line for the grantor to sign a notary block. That is it. No purchase price, no exchange of money, no requirement that anybody get anything in return. You sign 1 page in front of a notary, and the property that was yours belongs to somebody else permanently the moment it is recorded. 1 page, my name on it. And 1412 Chandler Row would belong to Dale Rutherford. Not to Dale and Sabrina, to Dale. I noticed that in the hardware store, and I have never stopped noticing it. Bryn read me the file. One signer, Corinne A. Ashford, grantor. Grantee Dale Rutherford. My daughter's name was not on that document anywhere. I got to Bernice's office at 2 o'clock on a Saturday because she told me to come, and she met me at the street door with her coat still on. I told her. She listened without interrupting, which is not her habit. When I finished, she said, "All right, sit down. I am going to tell you what was going to happen to you on the 27th of December, and I am going to be blunt because I think you have had enough gentleness." She said on the 27th, 2 days after Christmas, a mobile notary was going to arrive at 1412 Chandler Row at 10 in the morning. Your daughter would have made coffee. There would be a folder on the dining room table with a small stack of papers in it, and probably a pen already out. She said, and somebody, my guess is Sabrina and not Dale, would have said something like, "Mom, we wanted to do this while everybody was together for the holidays. It has been 2 years. You always said 2 years. We want to do it the right way so nobody has to worry." She said, and they would have been warm. That is the part I need you to understand. Nobody was going to be cruel to you on the 27th. It was going to be the nicest morning you had had with your family in a year, and you would have signed one page and everyone would have hugged you. I said, Bernice, stop. She said no, because here is the part after that. She said, Corinne, a man who owns real property free and clear can walk into a bank and borrow against it. Not a small amount. A great deal and quickly and at a good rate, because a paid-off house in Aldergate is the best collateral in this county. Now, tell me what you know about the brewery. And I sat there in that office and I said out loud for the first time a thing I had known for 8 months and had never once let myself finish a sentence about. I said the second location never opened. She said, go on. I said he signed a letter of intent on a building on Wells Street 2 years ago, and he talked about it constantly, and then in April he stopped talking about it. And in June, Sabrina said something about how the tap room was slow this year, and then she changed the subject. And Vivian stopped mentioning it at all, and Vivian mentions everything. Bernice said that is what I would expect. I said so he was going to put my house up as collateral for his brewery. Bernice said that is what a paid-off house is for, if you are a man with business debt and no equity anywhere else. And Corinne, I want you to understand the sequence, because the sequence is the cruelty. First he gets the deed, then the house is his, then he mortgages it. And then if the brewery goes the way brewery debt tends to go, the bank takes a house you paid $338,000 for in cash, and you are not on the paperwork anywhere, and there is no legal theory in Indiana that gets it back for you. She said he was never going to keep that house safe for the family. He was going to spend it. I did not cry. I wanted to tell you I did because that would be a more sympathetic story, but I did not. I sat in a chair in a lawyer's office above a bakery on a Saturday afternoon in December, and I felt something that I can only describe as the floor of my life becoming visible. Because do you know what the worst part was? I would have signed it. Not on the 27th, maybe, but someday. That was always the plan. Bernice had said 2 years, and 2 years was up in March. And I had already been thinking about it. I had already been thinking that in the spring I would call her and we would do it properly, and I would sign that house over to my daughter and her husband, and file the gift tax return and be done. They did not have to do any of it. Not the forging, not the notary, not 1 hour of it. If they had just been kind to me, if they had kept the carriage house, if we had kept Sunday coffee, if one single time in 2 years somebody had said, Corinne, come sit up here by us, I would have given them the house. I said that out loud to Bernice, and Bernice Kaplan, who has been practicing law in this town for 41 years, took her glasses off and rubbed the bridge of her nose and said, I know. I have watched it my entire career. They almost never have to take it. It is almost always sitting right there, waiting to be handed over. They take it because taking it is faster, and because somewhere along the way, they stopped believing you were a person who could decide anything. I said, so what do I do? She said, nothing. Today, nothing. I said, Bernice. She said, Corinne, listen. What we have right now is a forged permit application and a scheduled signing appointment for a document you have not signed. That is a plan. It is a filthy plan, and it is aimed at your throat. But a plan is not a crime, and nobody has taken anything from you yet. If you go over there tonight and scream, here is what happens, they cancel the notary. They say it was a misunderstanding. They say Sabrina signed the permit thing because she has power of attorney, which she does not. But they will say it. And everybody is very sorry, and in 18 months they try again a different way, and you never see it coming. She said, right now you know something they do not know you know. That is the single most valuable thing you will ever have in a situation like this, and you get to spend it exactly once. She said, so do not spend it yet. I said, then what? And Bernice Kaplan said, I want to know one more thing before you decide anything. I want to know whether your daughter is a bystander or a participant. She said, because those are 2 entirely different stories. Corinne, and you cannot make a decision about the rest of your life until you know which one you are in. I drove home in the dark. It was 4:30 and already full night the way it is here in December. And at 7 o'clock that evening my phone rang and it was Sabrina, and she was crying. Mom, she said, and her voice was thick. Mom, I have been sick about this all week. I said, about what, honey? She said, about the text. About what I sent you. Mom, it was 3 in the morning. I was half asleep. Vivian had been going on all evening, and I caved. I caved, and I sent you the worst text of my entire life, and then I was too much of a coward to take it back. I sat down on the arm of my couch. She said, please come Christmas Eve. Please. I mean it. I told Vivian this morning, I said, my mother is coming, and that is not a discussion. I said, and what did she say? Sabrina said, she said, fine. She said, of course. Mom, she was fine about it. She was fine about it. I want you to notice something with me because I noticed it in real time sitting on the arm of a couch with my daughter crying in my ear. 6 days earlier at 3 in the morning, Vivian Rutherford had cared enough about my absence to have my daughter wake up and send a text about it. And now allegedly, she was fine. Nothing had changed in 6 days. Vivian had not had a change of heart. What had changed was the calendar. The notary was booked for the 27th. And you cannot walk a woman into a room on the 27th and have her cheerfully sign away a house if you have spent the 24th making it clear she is not wanted in it. You need her warm. You need her feeling like family again. You need her to have had a lovely Christmas. I had been disinvited by a woman who wanted me gone and re-invited by a plan that needed me pliable. I said, "Of course I'll come, honey." She said, "Really?" I said, "Really, I would not miss it." She cried a little more and said she loved me and said she was going to do better, and I said I know, and we hung up. And I sat in my dark living room and I said out loud to nobody in an empty apartment, well, now I know she is not a bystander, but I did not know it well enough, not to build a life on. A mother can talk herself out of anything, and I could feel myself already thinking. But she cried, Corinne, you heard her. She cried. So on Sunday morning I called Bernice at home, which she had told me to do, and I said I want to know for certain. Tell me how to know for certain, and tell me how to do it, so that nothing I do can ever be used against me. She said, all right. First, understand where you are. Indiana is a one-party consent state. If you are a party to a conversation, you may record it, and you do not need to tell anyone you are doing it. That is the law here, and it is not a close question. She said second, and write this down. The device stays on your body, in your pocket, in your bag, on your person the entire time. You do not set it down. You do not leave it in a room and walk out. You do not put it under anything. There is a very bright line between a woman with a recorder in her cardigan and a woman who has planted a device in somebody's house, and you are going to stay a mile on the correct side of it. Do you understand me? I said, I understand you. She said third. Do not interrogate anybody. Do not lead. You are not building a trap, Corinne. You are going to be present with your ears on, which is what you have been doing your entire adult life. She said in fourth. You may not like what you get. Are you prepared for that? I said, Bernice, I have been prepared for that since Wednesday. I have just been refusing to admit it. I still have my backup recorder. Every court reporter has one. The machine catches the words, but the audio catches everything else. The trailing off the crosstalk, the man who says something under his breath that the record needs. Mine is a little black Sony about the size of a deck of cards, and I had carried it in a bag for 35 years, and it had been sitting in the drawer of my desk since I retired. I put fresh batteries in it Sunday morning. Then I made a coffee cake because it travels well, and because I am who I am. And I put a cardboard box in the trunk of my car. The box was real. I want to say that. Everything I did that Sunday was real. In the box were things of Sabrina's I had been storing for 11 years since we cleared out the old house on Rudisill. Her high school yearbooks. A ceramic bowl she made in 7th grade. 2 of her father's flannel shirts that she had asked me to keep for her when she was 22 and could not look at them. I had been meaning to bring that box over for 2 years. I brought it that Sunday because it gave me a reason to be there, and because it was true, and I have found that the 2 are usually available at the same time if you are patient. I got to 14-12 Chandler Row at 11 in the morning on Sunday the 21st of December. The recorder was in the left pocket of my cardigan under my coat, running from the moment I turned off the ignition. Sabrina opened the door and hugged me for a long time in the doorway, and it was a real hug, and that is the part that I still cannot fully hold in my 2 hands. It was a real hug. There was nothing false in it. Mum, come in, it's freezing. The house smelled like cinnamon and pine. There was a tree in the front window, a real one 9 feet at least, and every ornament on it was gold and white, and I did not see a single one of the ornaments Sabrina had made as a child, the ones I had given her in a shoebox when she got married. We sat at the kitchen table. She made coffee in a French press, because that is what they do now. Dale came through and clapped me on the shoulder and said, Hey, Corinne, good to see you, and went back to the basement where he was doing something with a keg. And for about 40 minutes, it was the nicest time I had spent with my daughter in a year. We looked through this box. She held up the ceramic bowl and laughed at how bad it was. She put her hand flat on one of Vaughn's flannel shirts and did not say anything for a while, and I did not either. She said, Mom, I wanted to say something. I said, all right. She said, this year has been so much, with Dale's stuff and Vivian, and I know I have been absent. I know that. And after the holidays, I want us to reset. I want to sit down just us and get everything cleaned up. I said, cleaned up how? And she stirred her coffee, and she said it very lightly the way you mentioned the weather. She said, well, like the house stuff. You know, it has been 2 years. You always said 2 years. I just think it would be good to have it all handled properly so that nobody has to think about it anymore. There it was, planted so gently that if I had not had a folder in my apartment with a forged signature in it, I would have heard nothing but a considerate daughter tidying up loose ends. I said, I suppose it has been 2 years. She said it's been 2 years in March. I said, HM, and I let it sit because that is the other thing 35 years in a courtroom teaches you. Silence is not an absence. Silence is a tool, and most people cannot survive 4 seconds of it without filling it. Sabrina filled it. She said, and Mom, honestly, it would be such a weight off. For all of us. Because right now, if anything happened to you, God forbid it would be this whole mess probate and everything, and Dale gets so stressed about it. I said, does he? She said, oh my God, you have no idea. And then, because I am not made of iron, I asked her one question that I should not have asked, and that I am glad I asked. I said, honey, can I ask you something? She said, of course. I said, if I ever said no to you about something big, what do you think you would do? She looked up from her coffee and she laughed. I want to be precise about the laugh because I have listened to it 40 times since. It was not a cruel laugh. It was not a smirk. It was the delighted, affectionate laugh of a woman whose mother has said something charmingly absurd. She said, Mom, you have never said no to me in your life. From the basement stairs, Dale, who had come up for something and was standing in the doorway with a wrench in his hand, said, that's the truth. And they both laughed. And my daughter reached over and put her hand on top of mine on that table, and she said, still smiling, still warm, and she meant it kindly. She meant it as a compliment, and I want you to hear it exactly the way it was said. She said, honestly, it's one of my favorite things about you. I said, well, and I smiled at her. I have been told my whole life that I have a good courtroom face. I had never before had occasion to use it on my own child. 20 minutes later, I said I needed to use the powder room, and I went down the front hall, and I shut the door. The powder room at 1412. Chandler Row is under the front stairs, and it shares a wall with the butler's pantry, and the pocket doors between the pantry and the kitchen have never closed properly because they are 113 years old, and the house has settled. I know that because I paid for that house. I was in there for perhaps 2 minutes when I heard the back door, and I heard Vivian Rutherford's voice, and my hand stopped on the tap. She said, Sabrina, whose car is that? And Sabrina said, it's my mom's. She brought a box of my old stuff. Vivian said, oh, for heaven's sake today. And Sabrina said, she's fine, Vivian, she's being lovely. And then Vivian said low and quick, and I heard every syllable through 113-year-old pocket doors with a recorder in my cardigan pocket. Did she get the hearing notice? Sabrina said what? Vivian said the commission. They send one to the owner of record, Sabrina. It is in the ordinance. I looked it up. If she got one, she can call them and object. And that is the whole thing gone. They will pull the application, and there will be questions about who filed it. There was a pause, and my daughter said in a completely calm voice she won't call them. Vivian said, you are certain. And Sabrina said, Vivian, she doesn't open half her mail. And even if she did, she wouldn't do anything about it. She never does. She'll just feel bad about it quietly for 6 months like she does with everything. And Vivian said, and the 27th. And Sabrina said, the 27th is fine. I've been laying it in for weeks. I did it again this morning. She'll sign. She always signs. And then Dale's voice from somewhere near the stove. And this is the last thing on the recording before I flushed a toilet I had not used and ran a tap I did not need. Dale said she'll sign it and thank us for letting her. I came out of that powder room. I walked down the front hall of the house I had paid for in cash with my husband's death money, and I went into the kitchen and I said, Vivian, how nice, Merry Christmas. And Vivian Rutherford turned around with a plate of something in her hands and said, Corinne, what a treat. And I stood there and I made small talk for 11 minutes about the Christmas Eve open house, about the caterer, about whether the weather would hold. I asked Vivian about her sinuses. She told me at some length. And then I said I had better get going before the light went. And Sabrina walked me out to the car and hugged me on the driveway and said, I'm so glad you came, Mom. And I said, me too, honey. And I drove down Chandler Row under the arch of 100-year-old trees with all their bare branches lit up. And I did not turn on the radio, and I did not cry, and my hands were perfectly steady at 10 and 2 the entire way home. I did not listen to it that afternoon. I could not. I made dinner and did not eat it. I watched 40 minutes of a program about the restoration of a canal boat. I washed the same 3 dishes twice. At midnight I went to bed and lay there with my eyes open. At 1:30 I got up, And here is what I did, and I want to describe it carefully because it is the strangest and most important thing I have ever done in my life. I went into the second bedroom that I use as an office, and I took my writer out of its case. That is what we call it, the machine. 22 keys and a paper tray and a little screen in mine is a Stentura that I bought in 1994 and had refurbished twice and could not bring myself to sell when I retired. I set it up on the desk. I put the recorder next to it. I put on my headphones, the big padded ones, with the volume wheel, the ones I had worn for 35 years. And at 10 minutes to 2 in the morning on the 22nd of December, in an apartment on Delaney Street, with one lamp on, I hit play and I took down testimony. I want to tell you why. Because I could have just listened. I had heard it once already in real time through a door. I did not need a transcript. There was no proceeding. There was no judge. Nobody was ever going to ask me to certify it. I did it because it was the only way I knew how to be in the room without falling apart. 35 years. A man describing how he found his brother. A woman explaining under oath why she had not called anyone for 6 hours. A father reading his own text messages out loud. And every single time my hands moved and my face did not, because the job is to get it down. So I put my hands on the keys and I got it down. She won't call them. She doesn't open half her mail. She wouldn't do anything about it. She never does. She'll just feel bad about it quietly for 6 months like she does with everything. I've been laying it in for weeks. She'll sign. She always signs. She'll sign it and thank us for letting her. I wrote every word. And where Vivian overlapped Sabrina, I marked the crosstalk, and where my daughter paused before she answered. I marked the pause because a pause is part of the record, and I put in the timestamps, and when it was finished, I hit the key that ends the take. And then I sat there with my hands in my lap, and I read it back. And that is when I broke, not at the words. I had already heard the words. I broke at the format, because what was on that screen was a transcript. And a transcript is what you make when somebody's words matter. That is the entire purpose of the thing. For 35 years, I sat in a corner and turned other people's speech into a permanent record because somebody somewhere had decided that what was said to that person mattered enough to be preserved forever. Nobody had ever done it for me. So at 2 in the morning in a spare bedroom, I did it for myself. I made a record. I put my own life on the page the way I had put 1,000 strangers' lives on the page. And I sat there and I cried for about 20 minutes with my headphones still on. And it was not the pretty kind. At around 3, I stopped. I blew my nose. I made tea. And then I remembered something, and I went into the kitchen and opened the cabinet above the stove and took down the recipe box. It is a green tin box with a hinged lid. It was my mother's. And in the front of it, behind the divider card marked Maine, there are 12 index cards written in blue, ballpoint, and careful looping 15-year-old cursive. Sabrina made them for me the Christmas she was in the 9th grade. She had gone through my mother's box and my scribbled envelopes, and she had copied out my 12 recipes onto proper cards so I would stop losing them. It took her weeks. She hid it from me. She was so proud of herself she nearly gave it away 4 times. And she had headed every single one of them the same way because she thought it looked official. Corinne's chicken and noodles, Corinne's cornbread dressing, Corinne's pot roast, Corinne's sour cream coffee cake. 12 cards, 12 Corinnes. And every single C had a small soft loop coming off the top of it. I took the cards, and I took the historic commission application out of the Redweld folder, and I laid them side by side on my kitchen table under the light at 3 o'clock in the morning. The same loop, the exact same loop, a little flourish. A 15-year-old girl had invented because she thought her mother's name deserved something fancy and had used ever since every time she wrote it on every card and every tag and every envelope for 18 years. She had not copied my signature off a Christmas card. She had written my name the way she had always written my name, because it never occurred to her, not for 1 second, that anyone would ever look. That was the moment. Not the disinvitation, not the carriage house, not the notary, not she'll sign and thank us for letting her. 12 recipe cards and a permit application on a kitchen table, and my daughter's handwriting on all 13. I put the cards back in the tin. I put the application back in the folder. I washed my mug and set it in the rack. And I stood in my kitchen at 3:15 in the morning on the 22nd of December, 63 years old, and I said out loud in the empty room in a completely ordinary voice, the way you would say that the car needs gas. All right then, that was the whole ceremony. 2 words. And then I went to bed and I slept for 6 hours without moving, which I had not done in 2 years. I was in Bernice Kaplan's office at 9 in the morning on Monday the 22nd of December, and I had not rehearsed anything, and I did not need to. I sat down and I said I want to sell the house. Bernice did not react. She picked up a pen. She said, "Tell me what you heard." I told her. All of it in order with the pauses marked because that is how I had it. She won't call them. She doesn't open half her mail. She never does. I've been laying it in for weeks. She'll sign. She always signs. She'll sign it and thank us for letting her. And then I told her about the recipe cards. Bernice set the pen down and put both hands flat on the desk and looked at them for a moment. Then she said, "All right, Corinne. Here is what I am obligated to tell you before you say another word." She said you have 4 separate things you can do, and they are independent of each other, and you can do any of them, all of them, or none of them. She said 1. You can do nothing except stop it. Cancel the signing on Monday. Object to the application. That is the smallest version. It costs you nothing. It protects the house, and your family never has to know that you know. She said 2. You can end their occupancy. 30-day notice tenants at will clean as glass, and if they do not go, we file a possessory action in small claims, and a judge signs an order in about 6 weeks. She said 3. You can sell it. You are the owner, and you do not need anybody's permission. Listed conventionally in Aldergate in the spring, you get near $400,000, and it takes 3 to 5 months. If you want it done before the new year, there are funds that buy houses in this county for cash as occupants and all, and they pay considerably less. She said in 4. The forgery. You can execute an affidavit of forged instrument, which I file with the commission, and which kills the application on the spot, and you can make a report to the Fort Wayne Police Department. Corinne, be clear about this one. If you make that report, it stops being yours. It goes to a detective, and then to a prosecutor, and they do not consult you. A level 6 felony carries real consequences. If they charge, they charge. She said, and Corinne, I would be doing you a disservice if I did not say the next part out loud. You believe your daughter signed that document. I believe it too. If a prosecutor believes it, the person who gets charged is not Dale Rutherford. I sat there for a long time. Outside the window, a city truck was salting Wells Street. I watched it go by. I said, Bernice, can I think out loud for a minute? She said that is what the hourly rate is for. I said, if I only cancel the notary, nothing changes. They will be embarrassed for a week, and then they will find another road. Bernice, they have been at this since September. These are not people who tried something once. She said, I agree. I said if I only give them notice to leave, then I still own a house that Vivian Rutherford is going to spend the next 5 years trying to get into, and I will spend the rest of my life being managed. She said, also true. I said, so it has to be sold. Bernice said, that is your decision to make. I said, I know it is. I am making it. Sell it. She said, Corinne, you will lose money. You paid $338. You will get somewhere in the low 320s from a fund, and Aldergate has appreciated, so what you are actually giving up is closer to $70,000 against the spring market. And I said the sentence I have repeated to myself probably 600 times since. I said, Bernice, $70,000 is a great deal of money. It is not as much money as the rest of my life. She wrote something on her pad. Then she said, in the forgery. And that is where I stopped. I want to be honest about this, because this is the part where somebody could decide I am a monster, and I would rather you decide it with the facts. I sat in that office for a long time, thinking about a 15-year-old girl hunched over a stack of index cards for 3 weeks, so her mother would stop losing recipes. And then I thought about the fact that the loop on the C was on that permit application, and that a woman in her 30s had picked up a pen and written her own mother's name on a certification under penalty of perjury, and had done it so casually that she used her girlhood flourish, because it did not occur to her that her mother was a person who could ever look up. And I said, file the affidavit with the commission. Bernice said, in the police report. I said, not yet. She said, Corinne. I said, Bernice, I am going to be very precise with you, because precision is the only thing I have ever been good at. I want that application dead, and I want it dead in a way that is on the record with the city of Fort Wayne, so that if anybody ever says I made this up, there is a sworn document with my name on it, correctly spelled, correctly signed in a public file. That is not mercy. That is a shield. I said, but I am not going to hand my daughter to a prosecutor 8 days before Christmas, because I am angry. If she does it again, or if she does something like it to somebody else, then it will be different. Right now, I am going to take back what is mine, and I am going to tell her the truth to her face, and I am going to let her live with it. Bernice looked at me for a while. She said that is a more difficult choice than the other one. I said, I know. She said, all right. Affidavit with the commission. No police report. I will note the file that we discussed it, and that you declined at this time. And Corinne, that note protects you too, because it shows you did not sit on a forged instrument for no reason. Then she pulled a folder out of her drawer and set it on the desk. She said, "Now, there is one more thing, and I have to raise it because I would be committing malpractice if I did not." She said, "Do you remember what else you signed in March of 2 years ago?" I said, "The deed." She said, and I did not remember. I truly did not. She turned the folder around and slid it across to me. It was a transfer on death deed, recorded in Allen County, executed by Corinne A. Ashford, owner, on the same afternoon as the purchase, naming as the sole transfer on death beneficiary of the real estate commonly known as 1412 Chandler Row, Sabrina Rutherford. Bernice said you signed it 40 minutes after you took title. It was my recommendation and you agreed to it in about 4 seconds. Indiana has a transfer on death statute for real property. It means that if you die, that house passes to your daughter, automatically, immediately, outside probate, no court, no delay, no lawyer, no fee. She would have gotten it if you had walked out of my office in March and been hit by a bus in the parking lot. I sat there holding that piece of paper. I said, "Does she know?" Bernice said, "I have no idea. I did not tell her." You do not tell people what is in your estate plan unless you choose to. Did you? And I sat there and I tried to remember and I could not. And then I did remember, and it was worse. I said I told my sister. I told Nadine. I remember standing in my kitchen the week after and saying, "Well, it is all set. If anything happens to me, it goes straight to Sabrina, no mess, no probate. Bernice handled it." I said I do not think I ever said it to Sabrina directly. I think I assumed she knew because I assumed everybody knew because it never occurred to me that it was a secret. And then I remembered something else and I had to put the paper down on the desk. Bernice said, "What?" I said, "Yesterday morning at that table, my daughter told me we needed to get everything cleaned up because if anything happened to me, God forbid it would be this whole mess, probate and everything." She said, "Dale gets so stressed about it." I said, "Bernice, there was no mess. There has not been a mess for 2 years. It was already hers. It was already completely, automatically, effortlessly hers, and all she had to do was outlive me." Bernice Kaplan said in a very quiet voice, "Yes." I said they were not trying to protect her inheritance. She said no, they were trying to accelerate it. Because a house you inherit in 20 years is worthless to a man with a note coming due in March. I said revoke it. She said, "Corinne, take a day." I said no, revoke it. And Bernice, do it properly, recorded, dated, on file, because someday somebody is going to tell a story about this, and I want the county records to be able to answer them. She said, "All right. I want to say something now, and I have thought about how to say it for 2 years. I know what it sounds like when a mother takes her child out of her will. It sounds like the worst thing a person can do. But I want you to understand what that document actually was. That transfer on death deed was the last thing I had left of Vom on that shoulder of a county road with 30 seconds to live, putting the truck in park. It was me saying I am going to arrange my death so that it is easy for you. I am going to make sure that when the worst day of your life comes, at least the paperwork is done, at least nobody hands you a bill. At least there is one thing you do not have to figure out. That is what it was. That is all it ever was. And my daughter sat at my grandmother's oak table and used the fiction of that mess to walk me toward a notary. You do not revoke a document like that out of spite. You revoke it because the thing it was protecting no longer exists. The man who bought my house was named Emmett Shaw, and he called me at 4 o'clock that same Monday afternoon. His fund is called Silver Maple Holdings, and they buy 8 to 12 houses a year in Allen County and hold them, and he did not waste 1 minute of my time, and I appreciated it enormously. He said, "Mrs. Ashford, I know the block. 326,000 cash, as is no inspection, no appraisal, no financing. I will not ask you to fix anything or clean it out. And I understand there are occupants." I said there are. My daughter and her husband. No lease, no rent, and my attorney is preparing a 30-day notice which will be served on Christmas Eve. There was a pause on the line, and then Emmett Shaw said without a flicker, "All right. Then I would like to close on the 30th of January, which gives the notice room to run." Then he said, "Mrs. Ashford, I do about 9 of these a year, and about 2 of them are somebody's family. I am not going to ask about yours. I just want to tell you that the people who regret it are the ones who did it fast and angry, and you do not sound fast or angry, so I suspect you will be fine." We signed the purchase agreement on Tuesday the 23rd of December at 10 in the morning in a conference room on Wells Street with snow coming down outside the window. It took 11 minutes. I initialed 9 places and signed 3. Corinne A. Ashford, no loop on the C. At 11:15, I signed the affidavit of forged instrument, and Bernice's paralegal walked it over to the commission office in the Citizens Square building before noon, which killed the application on the spot and put a sworn document in a public file that will outlive all of us. At 11:40, I signed the revocation of the transfer on death deed, and it was recorded at the Allen County Recorder's Office at 1:52 in the afternoon on the 23rd of December, and there is a stamp on it with the exact minute, and I have a certified copy in a drawer. And at noon, Bernice handed me a manila envelope. She said, "This is the notice. It has been reviewed by 2 other attorneys in this building because I wanted to be sure. It identifies you as sole owner of record. It states that the occupancy is a tenancy at will. It terminates that tenancy effective 30 days from service. It advises them that the property is under contract for sale with a closing date of January 30th. It is signed by you and by me." She said it does not call anybody names. It does not mention the notary. It does not mention the commission. It does not mention your daughter's handwriting. It is 4 paragraphs long, and it is as cold as a stone, and that is exactly what it should be. I said, "When will you serve it?" She said, "That is your call." And I said, "Christmas Eve, 7:30 in the evening." Bernice said, "Corrine." I said, "Bernice, I know what you are going to say." She said, "I am going to say it anyway. It does not have to be public. You can hand them this envelope in a quiet room on the 26th, and it does exactly the same thing legally, and nobody's neighbors are standing there." I said, "I know." She said, "So tell me why." And I told her, and it is the truest thing I said that whole month. I said, "Bernice, for 2 years I have been made small in front of people. In a foyer, at a wedding reception with a microphone, on a porch with a coffee cake in my hands, while a woman in a cardigan looked down at me from the top of a staircase in a building I own. Every single one of those was in front of somebody." I said, "And every single time I handled it quietly, because I am a person who handles things quietly, and every single time the quiet was read as agreement." I said, "They are going to stand up in that house on Christmas Eve in front of that entire street and raise a glass to a home. I know they are. That is what Vivian does. And I am not going to sit at the end of that table and hear it and then be handed my coat." I said, "I am going to be in the room." Bernice looked at me for a long moment, and then she said, "All right. I will come myself, 7:30. And Corinne, when it happens, do not raise your voice not once, because the only thing that can hurt you now is losing your temper in front of witnesses." I said, "Bernice, I have never raised my voice in a room in my life. It is a professional requirement." On Tuesday afternoon, I went to 1412 Chandler Row for the last time. They were not home. Sabrina works Tuesdays, and Dale is at the tap room by 2, and I knew that, and I let myself in with my own key, which I had had for 2 years and had used 4 times. The house was very quiet and very warm, and it smelled like a pine tree. I walked through all of it. The front room with the 9-foot tree. The dining room with my grandmother's oak table set up with both leaves in for Christmas Eve, 12 chairs around it. The butler's pantry with the pocket doors that do not close. Upstairs, 3 bedrooms, the smallest one at the end of the hall, now an office with a Peloton in it. And then I went out of the back door and down the brick drive and up the outside stairs of the carriage house, and I opened the door because I am the owner, and it was not locked, and I did not care in the slightest. Vivian Rutherford lived there. I want to be accurate because accuracy is the point. It was not a guest room. There was a closet with 40 years of clothing in it, wool coats and garment bags, 20 pairs of shoes on a rack, prescription bottles on the bathroom shelf, a framed photograph of Hollis and Vivian on their wedding day on the nightstand, a landline telephone, a chest of drawers with a jewelry tray and a dish of hairpins. There was mail on the little table by the door, addressed to Vivian Rutherford at 1412 Chandler Row, Unit B. Unit B, somebody had gotten the post office to recognize the carriage house as a separate address. I stood in the middle of that room for a while. Then I went back into the main house, and I did the one thing I had actually come to do. 2 years earlier, when they moved in, I had given them a framed photograph of Vaughn. It was a good one. The only good one taken at a cookout in 2009, him laughing at something out of frame with a spatula in his hand. It had been on the mantel in the front room for the first year. Then, in the spring, it was not on the mantel anymore, and I never asked because I never asked. I opened the drawers in the sideboard in the dining room, and I found it in the second one, face down under a stack of placemats with a small crack across the corner of the glass. I stood there and looked at my husband's face for a while. And then I put it in my bag, and I went out the front door, and I locked it behind me, and I stood on the porch of 1412 Chandler Row in the snow, and I said out loud quietly to a house, "I am sorry. You deserved better people in you than we turned out to be." And then I went home and pressed my navy dress. I woke on the 24th of December at 5:20 in the morning, and I lay in the dark and listened to the furnace come on. On every other Christmas Eve of my adult life, I would already have been up. There is a way you have to do cornbread dressing if you want it right, And it starts the day before with the cornbread going stale on a sheet pan, and it starts at 5 in the morning with a pound of sage sausage and 3 onions and enough butter that you should not think about it. Vaughn used to come into the kitchen in his robe at 6 and steal a piece of the raw cornbread, and I would hit his hand with a wooden spoon, and he would do it again. This year there was no dressing because I had been told I did not need to bring anything. So I made coffee and sat at my kitchen table in the dark and watched the sky go from black to the color of dishwater over the parking lot. And at 7 o'clock the sun came up on the last day of the life I had been living. Sabrina called at 9. She was in a wonderful mood. Vivian had arrived at 7 with the caterer's van behind her. The Marchettis were coming, and the Ainsworths from across the street, and Dr. Pyle and his wife, who have the yellow house on the corner, and about 30 other people from the block. She said, "Mom, it's going to be so pretty." Vivian did the whole staircase in cedar. She said, "Come at 6:30, you can help me with the napkins." They would not let me cook. They would not let me plan. They would not let me bring a pie. But I could fold the napkins. I said I will be there at 6:30. She said, "Love you, Mom." I said, "I love you, Sabrina. I have loved you every single day of your life." And there was a small pause, because that was more than I usually said. And then she said, "AW, Mom, are you getting sentimental on me?" And I said, "It is Christmas." At 10 I drove to Bernice's office. The building was dark and locked, and she came down and let me in herself, and we stood in the little lobby by the mailboxes because neither of us felt like going upstairs. She had the envelope with her in a coat pocket, and she did not take it out. She said, "I will serve it myself, 7:30. Then she said, "Corinne, look at me." I looked at her. She said, "You can still call this off. I will drive to that house at 7:30, and I will ring the bell, and I will say Merry Christmas, and hand you your coat, and we will do this on the 26th in a conference room instead. Nobody will ever know. That option is available to you until 7:29. I said, "I know it is." She said, "All right. Then I will see you at 7:30. And then Bernice Kaplan, who has never once hugged me in 20 years, put her hand on my arm and left it there for a second and said, "I have watched a lot of people do this. Almost none of them enjoyed it. Every single one of them slept better afterward. That is the trade, and it is not a good trade, and it is the only one on offer." I did one more thing that afternoon, and it is the only part of the day I have never told anybody until right now. I drove out to the cemetery on Lake Avenue. I have not been a regular visitor. Vaughn is not there, in my opinion, and standing on wet grass talking to a stone has never done much for me. But I went and I brushed the snow off with my glove, and I stood there in my coat for a while. And I said, "I am going to take back the house I bought with your money, and then I am going to tell our daughter the truth in front of 30 people, and she is never going to look at me the same way again, and I am doing it anyway." I said, "I know what you would say. You would say, 'Corinne, honey, are you sure in that voice where you had already decided I was right and just wanted me to hear myself say it out loud?' I said, 'I am sure, and I am sorry it took me 11 years to get angry.' And I went home and I ran a bath. At 5 o'clock I put on a navy dress that I have had for 6 years and that Vaughn never saw and would have liked. I put on his watch a small gold Bulova he wore every day of his working life until the band broke, which I have had resized and which I wear on the inside of my wrist so I can see it. I looked in the mirror. 63 years old. Reading glasses on a chain because I am my lawyer's age now, apparently. Gray coming in at the temples in a way I stopped fighting in 2019. A little brown bird. I looked at that woman in the mirror for a long time, and then I said out loud, "All right, let us go be a little brown bird." I picked up my handbag. In it were my keys, my wallet, my phone, my reading glasses, and one thing more. A rubber band around 12 index cards, written in blue ballpoint in a 15-year-old girl's careful cursive. Chandler Row on Christmas Eve is the most beautiful street in this city, and I will fight anyone who says different. Every house had candles in every window. The gas lamps along the brick were on. There were cars parked bumper to bumper on both sides for 2 blocks, and people walking up the middle of the street in coats with bottles of wine, calling out to each other. Somebody 2 doors down had a fire going in an outdoor pit, and you could smell it. I parked 4 houses down and walked. There were 40 people in that house by the time I got to the porch. Dale opened the door in a green sweater with a glass in his hand and said, "Corinne, Merry Christmas, get in here, it is Antarctica out there." The staircase was wrapped in cedar all the way up with white lights in it. There was a bar in the butler's pantry with a young man in a white shirt pouring a fire in the fireplace, somebody playing something quiet on a portable speaker. Sabrina came out of the kitchen in a dark red dress and hugged me and said, "Mom, you look so pretty," and she meant it, and I said, "So do you, honey." Vivian was in the front room by the fireplace with a glass of wine and cream, and Pearls holding court with 3 women from the block. She saw me and lifted 2 fingers off her glass, which is what she does instead of waving. She said, "Corinne, what a treat." I said, "Merry Christmas, Vivian." She said, "Isn't the staircase divine? I found the cedar at a farm out past Leo." I told Sabrina, I said, "This house has such good bones, it just needed somebody to see it." I said, "It does have good bones." Hollis was by the fire in a cardigan, and he came over and shook my hand with both of his and asked me about my knee, which I had mentioned to him one time 18 months ago. And I wanted on the record that Hollis Rutherford was from the first day to the last a decent man in a bad marriage. At 7 o'clock, Sabrina rang a little bell and called everybody to the dining room, which held maybe 20 at the table, with the rest standing along the walls with plates. My grandmother's oak table was set for 12 with both leaves in. There was a runner down the middle, and cedar and 3 glass hurricanes with candles in them. Vivian sat at the head, Dale at her right, Sabrina at her left, Hollis next to Dale, then the Marchettis, then Dr. and Mrs. Pyle, then the Ainsworths. And at the far end of my grandmother's table, in the last chair, as far from the head as that table can physically place a human being, there was one setting with a folded napkin. I want you to picture it because I have pictured it every day for 2 years. 12 people. 11 of them in a cluster of conversation at the top of the table, and one place setting at the bottom with 3 feet of empty cedar and candlelight between it and the nearest person. Sabrina touched my elbow and said, "Mom, you're down there. Is that okay?" It was the only way the numbers worked. I said, "That is fine, honey." And I walked the entire length of my grandmother's table, past every one of those people in the house I paid for with my dead husband's money, and I sat down in the last chair. And I want to tell you what I felt, and it was not humiliation. It was the calmest I have felt in my entire adult life, because I had spent 2 years walking to that chair, and this was the last time. They ate. It was very good food. Dr. Pyle's wife leaned across and asked me what I used to do, and I told her, and she said, "Oh, how interesting is it, like on television?" And I said, "Not really," and she said, and turned back. At 7:25, Vivian Rutherford stood up and tapped her glass with a butter knife. The room quieted. Somebody turned the music down. 40 people in the dining room, in the front room, and the hall all turned toward the head of my grandmother's table. Vivian said, "I will be brief." She was not brief. She thanked everyone for coming. She said what a joy it had been getting to know this street. She said a few words about the cedar, and then she got to it, and I could tell she got to it because her voice did the thing where it goes down instead of up. She said, "I want to say something about this house." She said, "When Dale and Sabrina found this place, I told them this is not just a house. This is where a family happens, and I have watched them make it into exactly that. Every board of it, every room." She said, "And I have to tell you, since I have been spending so much time here this year, I have fallen completely in love with it. There is nowhere I would rather be." She lifted her glass. She said so, to this beautiful home, to the family in it, and to many, many years of this. And 40 people in the house I bought raised their glasses and said to the house. Sabrina raised hers, Dale raised his, Hollis raised his. And at the far end of the table, a little brown bird in a navy dress put her hand around the stem of her glass and did not lift it and looked at her watch. Her husband's watch. 7:27. Somebody said, "Hear, hear." Somebody laughed. The music came back up. At 7:30, the doorbell rang. Dale said, "Who on earth?" and got up. I heard the front door. I heard a woman's voice calm and low, and I heard Dale say, "I'm sorry, who?" And then, "No, she's hang on." And then Dale came back into the dining room, and he was holding a large envelope, and he was looking at the far end of the table at me. He said, "Sabrina, there's an attorney at the door." The room did not go silent all at once. It went silent in pieces the way a room does the front hall first, and then the dining room, and then the people standing by the fire who did not know why they were stopping. Sabrina got up and went into the hall, and I heard Bernice Kaplan say, "Mrs. Rutherford, my name is Bernice Kaplan. I represent Corinne Ashford. I am serving you and Mr. Rutherford with a notice regarding the property at 1412 Chandler Row. I am sorry to do this today. Merry Christmas." And then the front door closed, and my daughter came into the dining room with 3 pages in her hands, and her face the color of the tablecloth, and she read, and Dale read over her shoulder, and I watched them get to the 3rd paragraph, and I watched them get to the word sold. Sabrina looked up. She said, "Mom." 40 people turned and looked at the end of the table. She said, "Mom, what is this?" And I put my napkin on the table, and I stood up, and I walked back up the length of my grandmother's table toward my daughter, and I did not hurry. I said, "It is a notice terminating your tenancy. You have 30 days. You need to be out by the 23rd of January. She said, "Did you do this?" And I said in a completely level voice in a room with 40 people in it, "Yes, Sabrina, I did." Dale said, "Corinne, hang on. There's been some kind of this says sold. This says the property's under contract." I said, "It is." He said, "You can't sell this house." I said, "Dale, I am the only person on the deed. I have been the only person on the deed for 2 years. I sold it yesterday morning at 10 o'clock to a man named Emmett Shaw for $326,000 cash as is. It closes on the 30th of January. The room made a sound, not words, 40 people inhaling. Sabrina said, "Mom, we live here." And I said, "You live here." Those are 2 different sentences, and it has taken me 2 years to learn the difference. And that is when Vivian Rutherford stood up at the head of the table. She said, "This is theft." She said it loudly to the room in the tone of a woman who has never once been contradicted in a room in her life. She said, "This is absolutely outrageous. You cannot put my son out of his home. There are laws." And I turned and looked at her fully for the first time in 3 years. I said, "Vivian, I am glad you brought up the laws, because I would like to ask you a question in front of your neighbors, and I would like you to answer it, and I already know the answer." I said what happened on the 11th of September. I have thought a great deal about the next 3 seconds, and I do not believe I will ever adequately describe them. Vivian Rutherford's face did not fall. It went blank. It went completely perfectly blank the way a screen goes blank, and her hand came up to her pearls. I said on the 11th of September, a mortgage servicer filed a foreclosure complaint in Allen Superior Court against Hollis and Vivian Rutherford. There is a first mortgage, and there is a home equity line taken out 4 years ago. The loss mitigation review failed in November. There is a hearing set for the 2nd week of January. I said it is a public court record. My attorney found it in one afternoon. Anybody in this room could look at it on Monday. Vivian said that is a lie. And Hollis Rutherford, in a cardigan by the fire, said quietly in a voice that carried the whole length of that room, "Viv, it isn't." And that was the moment the party ended. Somebody by the front door said we should, And the Ainsworths began putting on their coats, and the Marchettis did not, because human beings are human beings. And about half that room left over the next 10 minutes, and about half of it stayed exactly where it was and did not even pretend. I did not care. 6 months earlier, I would have died on the spot. That night, I did not care in the slightest. I said, "Vivian, you are going to lose your house in the 1st quarter of next year. And in September, you started looking for somewhere to land. And you found one. A paid-off carriage house in Aldergate behind your son with white curtains and a hackberry tree." I said, "And there was one thing in the way. One woman who happened to own it." Vivian said, "You have no idea what you are talking about." I said, "Unit B." She stopped. I said, "Somebody put in a change of address with the post office to have that carriage house recognized as Unit B. There is mail on the table by that door with your name on it. That is not a guest. That is a resident." Then I turned to Dale. And Dale Rutherford, I will say this for him, did not lie to me. He stood in that dining room with his jaw working, and he did not say a single word, because I think he understood before anybody else in that room did exactly how much I knew. I said, "Dale, on the 9th of December, you placed an order with Meridian Mobile Notary and Signing. You paid $195 for a mobile signing with recording service. You scheduled it for 10 o'clock in the morning on the 27th of December at this address. One signer, Corinne A. Ashford Granter. One document, a quitclaim deed conveying 1412 Chandler Row to Dale Rutherford." Somebody in the front hall said, "Oh my God." I said my name only, not Sabrina's, just yours. Dale said, "Corinne." I said, "And the reason is that a man cannot borrow against a house he does not own, and the second location on Wells Street never opened, and there is a note coming due, and a paid-off house in Aldergate is the best collateral in Allen County." I said, "You were not going to keep this house for the family, Dale. You were going to spend it." He put the envelope down on my grandmother's table, and he sat down in a chair heavily and put his hands over his face, and that was the whole of his defense. And then I turned to my daughter, and I want to tell you that this was the hardest part, harder than any of the rest of it, by an enormous margin, because Sabrina was standing there with the notice in her hand, and she was 33 years old, and she looked exactly like she looked at 9 when she broke my mother's blue bowl. She said, "Mom, I didn't know about the notary. I swear to God I didn't know about the notary." And I believed her. I want that on the record. I believed her then, and I believe her now. I do not think my daughter knew that her husband had booked a notary. I said, "I know you didn't." She said, "Then, Mom, this is Dale. This is not I would never." And I opened my handbag. I took out the rubber band and I slid it off, and I put 12 index cards down on my grandmother's oak table, spread out in the candlelight in front of 40 people. I said, "Do you know what these are?" She looked down at them. And I watched my daughter's face come apart in about a second and a half, which is the fastest I have ever seen anything happen to a human face. I said you made these for me the Christmas you were in the 9th grade. You went through Grandma's box and all my scribbled envelopes, and you copied out 12 recipes onto proper cards, so I would stop losing them. It took you 3 weeks. You nearly gave it away 4 times. I said, and you headed every one of them with my name because you thought it looked official. I said, Corinne's chicken and noodles, Corinne's cornbread dressing. I said, and you put a little loop coming off the top of the C because you were 15 and you thought your mother's name deserved something fancy. And you have written it that way ever since. On every gift tag, on every card, for 18 years. I reached into the bag and I took out one more piece of paper and I put it down at the end of the row of index cards. I said this came certified to my apartment on the 17th of December. It is a notice of public hearing from the Aldergate Historic Preservation Commission with an application attached to give the carriage house a permanent private entrance and a parking pad with a walkout to the alley. I said, and it has a certification on it under penalty of perjury that the applicant is the owner of record. I said, and it is signed Corinne A. Ashford. I said I did not sign it. And I put my finger on the signature, and then I moved my finger to the first index card. And I did not say anything else because I did not have to, because 40 people were leaning forward, and every single one of them could see it from where they stood. The same loop, 13 times. Nobody said anything for what felt like a very long time. Sabrina said in a voice about the size of a coin, Mom. I said my attorney filed a sworn affidavit of forged instrument with the commission yesterday morning. The application is dead. It is in a public file. I said, and she advised me that this is a level 6 felony in the state of Indiana, and that I should make a report to the police. The room went so quiet I could hear the candles. I said I did not make it. Sabrina's knees went. Dale caught her elbow. I said I did not make it, and I want you to understand why, because it is not because I forgave you. I have not forgiven you. It is because you were 15 years old once, and you spent 3 weeks on a Christmas present, and I remember it, and I could not do it. That is all. That is the entire reason. It is not a reprieve, and you should not treat it as one. Sabrina said, Mom, please can we go somewhere and talk about this? Please not here. And I said no, and then I said the rest of it. I said, Sabrina, on Sunday I came here with a box of your things. And at 11:40 in the morning, I excused myself to use the powder room under the stairs. I watched her face. I said the pocket doors between the butler's pantry and the kitchen do not close. They have not closed since 1911. I know that because I paid for this house. I said I was standing 10 feet away from you when Vivian came in the back door and asked whether I had received the hearing notice. Vivian Rutherford sat down. I said, and I heard you say she won't call them. She doesn't open half her mail. And even if she did, she wouldn't do anything about it. She never does. She'll just feel bad about it quietly for 6 months like she does with everything. I said, and I heard Vivian ask you about the 27th. And I heard you say the 27th is fine. I've been laying it in for weeks. I did it again this morning. She'll sign. She always signs. Sabrina was shaking her head slowly, not in denial, just shaking it. I said, and then your husband said she'll sign it and thank us for letting her. I looked at Dale. Dale did not look up. I said, and then I came out of that powder room and walked into the kitchen and said, Merry Christmas, Vivian, and asked her about her sinuses and made conversation for 11 minutes. And then you walked me to my car and hugged me and said you were glad I came. And I said, me too, honey. And I drove home. I said that was Sunday. This is Wednesday. Do you know what I have been doing for 3 days? Nobody answered. I said yesterday morning at 10 o'clock I signed a purchase agreement. Yesterday at noon I filed the affidavit. And then I said the last thing. I said, and yesterday afternoon at 1:52 I recorded a revocation of a transfer on death deed. Sabrina said, a what? And there it was. The last piece. The one I had been carrying since Monday morning like a coal in my hand. I said in March of 2 years ago, 40 minutes after I bought this house, I sat in Bernice Kaplan's office and signed a transfer on death deed naming you as the sole beneficiary of this property. It was recorded in Allen County. It meant that if I died, this house passed to you automatically. Immediately. Outside probate. No court, no lawyer, no fee, no mess. I said it has been sitting in the county records for 2 years. It was already yours, Sabrina. It has been yours the entire time. All you ever had to do was outlive me. My daughter made a sound I am not going to describe. I said it on Sunday morning at my grandmother's table. You told me we needed to get everything cleaned up because if anything happened to me, God forbid it would be this whole mess, probate and everything, and Dale gets so stressed about it. I said there was no mess. There was never a mess. I had already done it. I did it the same afternoon I bought it because I am your mother, and that is what I do. I arrange things so they will be easy for you later. I said, and you used it as a lever. I picked up my handbag. I said it was revoked at 1:52 yesterday afternoon. There is a stamp on it with the minute. And then Sabrina said the thing that people always say, and it came out of her in pieces. She said, Mom, please, please. And I stopped and I looked at my daughter and I said the thing I had been walking toward since a hardware store aisle on Broadway. I said on Sunday you told me that I have never said no to you in your entire life. You laughed when you said it. You said it was one of your favorite things about me. I said you were right. I never have. I said so. Here it is. I said, here is the no, Sabrina. And I put on my coat. Vivian Rutherford said from her chair in a small voice with nothing left in it at all, where are we supposed to go? And I said, Vivian, I imagine you will go wherever people go, which is what the rest of us have always done. And I walked down this front hall of 1412, Chandler Row, past the staircase wrapped in cedar, past 30 people standing with drinks in their hands who did not know where to look. And I opened my own front door, and I went out onto my own porch and down my own steps into the snow. And behind me the shouting started. I did not turn around. I did not look at the windows. I got into my car 4 houses down, and I sat for a moment and put my hands on the wheel, and I noticed that they were not shaking. And then I drove away down Chandler Row under 100-year-old trees strung with lights, and I did not go home. I drove out to the overlook on the bluff above the river where the 3 rivers come together, which is a place I had not been since Vaughn and I used to park there in 1983. I turned the engine off and watched the city. Every window in Fort Wayne was lit, and every one of them was a room with people in it on Christmas Eve, and I sat above all of it in a cold car by myself, 63 years old, having just detonated my own family in front of the entire 1100 block of Chandler Row. I want to tell you exactly what I felt because I have been asked, and I have never lied about it. I did not feel triumphant, not for 1 second. What I felt was the specific physical relief of setting down something heavy. It is what your arms feel like at the top of the stairs when the box is finally on the floor. It is not joy. Joy is a different animal. It is the absence of a weight you had carried so long you had stopped experiencing it as weight and started experiencing it as your own body. I sat there until my hands got cold. Then I took out my phone. 22 missed calls, 19 from Sabrina, 2 from Dale, 1 from Nadine. Nadine's text said, Corinne. Sabrina called me screaming. I don't know what happened. Whatever it was, I'm on your side and I always have been. Call me tomorrow. I love you. Then Sabrina's in order, which I read the way you read a transcript. The first ones were rage. How could you do that in front of everyone? You humiliated us. Then an hour later, fear. Mom, where are you? Mom, answer me. Mom, I'm scared. Please answer me. Then at 10:15, the one she thought would work. I wish Dad were alive to see who you turned into. I sat with that one for about 6 minutes. She reached for her father. She took the one person in the world who loved me without reservation, and she picked him up and swung him at my head because she believed that was the softest place on me. She was not entirely wrong. It was. I typed my answer as the overlook with the engine off and my breath fogging the windshield, and it was the only thing I sent her for 7 weeks. I wrote, Sabrina, I am going to answer once and then I am turning off my phone. I did not ruin Christmas. Christmas was ruined on the 9th of December when your husband booked a notary, and on the 17th when I opened an envelope with my own name forged on it. And it was ruined 100 smaller times before that, in ways nobody thought were worth mentioning. I am not what I turned into. I am what I always was and did not have the courage to be out loud. There is a difference, and someday you will understand it. As for your father, he spent the last 30 seconds of his life pulling a truck onto the shoulder so he would not hurt anybody. He would not be ashamed of me tonight. He would be ashamed that it took me 11 years. I love you. I have loved you every day of your life, and that is not in question now. When you are ready to talk, come alone. No Dale, no Vivian, nothing for me to sign, nothing to fix, just you and the truth out loud. Not before Merry Christmas. Then I turned the phone off and put it in the glove box and drove home. I got in a little after midnight. My apartment was exactly as I had left it, small and warm and entirely mine. I took off Vaughn's watch and put it in the dish. And then I sat down on the edge of my bed in a navy dress and I cried for about 40 minutes. And it was ugly, and I did not try to stop it. I cried for the girl in the 9th grade with the index cards. I cried for the Christmas Eves with the radio on and the turkey resting too long. I cried because I had just done the right thing, and the right thing turned out to be a bereavement. Nobody tells you that. Everybody tells you that when you finally stand up for yourself, there is a feeling of power. There is not. There is a funeral. And then I washed my face and went to bed, and I slept 9 hours. And when I woke up on Christmas morning, the sun was on the floor, and I lay there for a while and thought, well, all right, here we are. I did not turn my phone back on for 8 days. That week was the strangest and quietest of my life. I read 2 books. I walked in the mornings when the sidewalks were empty and everything was blue. Nobody needed anything from me, and I did not owe anybody a single thing. Nadine came over on the 27th, which was the day I was supposed to have been signing a quitclaim deed at 10 in the morning. She brought a casserole because that is what our mother taught us to do about everything. She sat at my table and said, "Corinne, is there any way back from this?" And I said back to what Nadine? To me, handing over a house and apologizing for having noticed. She was quiet for a bit. Then she said, "If I am honest with you, I would have done the exact same thing, except I would have shouted, and I would have thrown something, and I would have looked worse doing it." I laughed for the first time in 11 days. Before she left, she held on to me at the door and said into my shoulder, "I have known you since you were born, and you have been swallowing things your entire life. I am glad you finally spat one out." Those words held me up for about a month. They left on the 18th of January, 5 days before the notice ran out. I know because Emmett Shaw called and told me the house was empty and clean, and that they had left the keys on the kitchen island with a note that said, "Sorry about the fridge, the ice maker leaks." He said, "That is the most civilized version of this I have had in 9 years, and I thought you would want to know." They took a 2-bedroom apartment on the north side over near the hospital in a complex with a parking lot instead of a brick drive. My grandmother's oak table did not fit. Sabrina put it in a storage unit and paid for that unit every month for 2 years, which I did not learn until much later, and which undid me completely when I did. The sale closed on the 30th of January. Emmett Shaw shook my hand and said, "Mrs. Ashford, it has been a pleasure, and I hope I never have to do business with you again." And I understood exactly what he meant, and I told him thank you. $326,000 went into an account. I did not spend it. I put $300,000 of it back where it came from, into the accounts that exist, so that I can grow old without becoming a problem for anybody. But I kept $26,000 out, and with it, I bought a decent car, and I signed up for a woodworking class on Tuesday nights at a shop out on Wayne Trace because Vaughn had a table saw for 22 years, and I never once touched it, and he never once offered, and neither of us ever said a word about why. I was the only woman in the class, and I was 63, and I was terrible at it. The first thing I made was a box with a lid that did not fit. I put it on my counter and looked at it and thought, that is the first object in this apartment that exists, because I wanted it to. I also started going to a group on Thursday mornings in a church basement on Rudisill. Women over 60 and coffee and nobody calls it therapy. It turns out my story is not unusual. That was the part that flattened me. I went in thinking I had something remarkable to report, and I listened to 11 other women and heard my own life come out of 5 different mouths. Mothers who had given until there was nothing left of them to see. Mothers who had made themselves smaller and smaller to keep a peace that was never peace, just quiet. Mothers who had finally late and terrified chosen themselves, and mothers who had not, and knew it, and sat there with it. There is a woman there named Loretta who taught 4th grade for 31 years and has a voice like a screen door. The first morning I told the whole thing, she waited until I was finished, and then she said, "Well, you are a brave woman." And I said, "Loretta, I really am not. I was just tired." And Loretta said, "Honey, that is the same thing. Nobody brave ever felt brave. Brave is being worn down to nothing and taking the step anyway. The ones who feel brave are just people who have not been tested yet." I have thought about that a great deal. Sabrina and I did not speak for 7 weeks. Then on the 14th of February, a text came in. "Mom, can we talk, just me, nothing to sign?" I wrote back, "Yes, Saturday, come at 10. She came at 10 on a Saturday morning in jeans and an old sweatshirt, no makeup shadows under her eyes, and she looked 12 years old and 45 years old at the same time. She stood in my doorway and said, "Can I hug you?" And I said yes. We sat in my living room and drank coffee, and neither of us said anything for 4 minutes, which for the 2 of us is a geological era. Then she said, "Mom, why in front of everyone? Why like that? You could have handed me that envelope anywhere." And I said, "I know. Bernice told me the same thing and gave me the option 4 separate times. I said, Sabrina, every single time I was made small, it was in front of people. In a foyer at a wedding, on a porch at the end of a table with 11 people at the other end of it. And every single time I absorbed it quietly, and every single time the quiet got read as agreement. 2 years of that, and everybody in that room, including you, had come to believe something about me that was not true. I said so I took it back in front of the same people. That is not revenge. That is correcting the record. It is what I did for a living for 35 years, and I finally did it once for myself. She looked at the floor for a while. Then she said, I want you to know I didn't know about the notary. I have said it 100 times, and I know it doesn't matter. I said, I believe you, and you are right that it doesn't matter. She said, how can it not matter? And I said, because you signed the permit application. She did not deny it. That is the one thing I will always give her. She sat on my couch, and she did not deny it. She said, Vivian said it was just a formality. She said the city needs an owner's signature, and it's a rubber stamp, and you would have said yes anyway, and it wasn't worth bothering you at Thanksgiving. She said, and Mom, I sat down and I signed your name, and it took me 4 seconds, and I did not think about it again until the 24th of December. She said, that's the part. That's the part I can't get past. Not that I did it, that it took 4 seconds. And I said, yes, that is the part. And then I got up and went into my office and came back with a document in a folder, and I put it on the coffee table in front of my daughter. I said, I want you to read something. She opened it. It was 11 pages. Standard transcript format, 25 lines to the page line numbers down the left margin, speaker identification in caps, timestamps in the margin. Every crosstalk marked. Every pause noted in brackets. At the top of page 1 it said, in reconversation of December 23rd, taken at 1412 Chandler Row, Fort Wayne, Indiana. Reported by Corinne A. Ashford, RPR. Sabrina said, what is this? I said I recorded it. I am allowed to. Indiana is a one-party consent state, and I was in the house, and the recorder was in my cardigan pocket the entire time. And I asked a lawyer before I did it because I wanted to be able to say that sentence to you. I said, and then at 10 minutes to 2 in the morning on the 22nd of December, I put on my headphones and I set up my machine and I took it down. She said, Mom, why would you type it out? And I said, because that is what you do when what somebody said matters. I said for 35 years, I sat in the corner of a room and turned other people's words into a permanent record because somebody had decided that what happened to that person was worth preserving. Nobody ever did it for me. Not once. So at 2 in the morning, I did it for myself. I said, read it, out loud if you can. And my daughter sat on my couch on a Saturday morning in February and read her own words off a transcript. She got to line 14 on page 6. She won't call them. She doesn't open half her mail. She got to page 7. She'll just feel bad about it quietly for 6 months like she does with everything. She got to page 8 and the bracket that says pause 2 seconds. And then I've been laying it in for weeks. I did it again this morning. She'll sign. She always signs. She could not read Dale's line. She put the transcript on the coffee table and put both hands over her mouth and made a sound. I did not go to her. That was the hardest thing I have ever physically not done. When she could talk, she said, why does it look like that? Why does it look so official? And I said, because it is. That is what your words look like when somebody writes them down properly. She said, Mom, I sound like a person I don't know. And I said, no, honey. You sound like a person you had become. Those are different, and only one of them is fixable. We talked for 4 hours. It was the first honest conversation I had had with my daughter since she was about 19. She told me the brewery was finished. Dale had gone to the bank in January with no house and no collateral, and they had said no in 11 minutes, and the second location was dead, and the tap room was going to be a smaller and much less impressive thing, and he was going to have to work for somebody else for a while. She told me the foreclosure hearing had gone against Hollis and Vivian in the second week of January, and the sheriff's sale was set for the spring. They lost the house in April. There was no carriage house to move into, so they took a 2-bedroom rented condo out past the bypass with a shared laundry. And she told me with something like wonder in her voice that in January Dale had told his mother that if she ever spoke about Corinne Ashford the way she had spoken about Corinne Ashford, she would not be in their lives. She said he had shaken doing it. She said he had done it anyway. I did not feel good about any of it. I want to be honest with you about that because I know what this kind of story usually promises. I did not enjoy hearing that Vivian Rutherford was in a condo with a shared laundry. I felt something much quieter than that. I felt the sensation of a scale coming level after a long time out of true. Because I did not do this to them. I want to be extremely precise about that, and it is the closest thing to a moral I have. I did not ruin Vivian Rutherford. A mortgage servicer did in September, 4 months before I knew her name was on a docket. I did not close the brewery. $900,000 of business debt did. I did not put my daughter in an apartment on the north side. She put herself there when she picked up a pen and wrote my name with a loop on the C. All I did was stop. That is the whole thing. That is the entire mechanism. For 2 years I had been standing between those people and the consequences of their own choices, holding it off with both arms and calling that love. And in December I stepped aside. Everything that happened to them after that was already coming. It had been coming the whole time. It only needed me to quit blocking the door. At the end of that Saturday at about 2 in the afternoon, Sabrina asked me the question she had come to ask. She said, "Mom, is there a way back?" And I said no. I let it sit for a second because it needed to. Then I said there is a way forward. Those are not the same thing, and I am not going to pretend they are. Back is where the woman lived who folded the napkins and sat at the end of the table and said it's fine. She does not exist anymore, and I am not resurrecting her for anybody, including you. I said forward is possible. Forward means we start over as 2 grown women. It means you never manage me again. It means nobody ever tells me what Vivienne prefers. It means if you cannot defend me in a grocery store aisle, then you do not get to have me at your table. And it means that if it ever happens again, even once, even a small version, I will go, and that time I will not come back. And I want you to believe that, because it is the only reason it will not happen. She said, "I believe you." And I said, "Good. Then we can try." At the door she was putting her coat on, and I said, "Wait." And I went into my bedroom and opened the drawer in the nightstand and took out a small box that had been in there for 7 months. I gave it to her. She opened it and took out a thin gold chain with a flat disc on it and turned the disc over and read the date engraved on the back and looked up at me. She said, "Mom." I said, "That was for your 33rd birthday. I bought it in June. I never gave it to you because there was not an evening where it would have fit. I said you told me once you were afraid you would forget the exact day, so I had it put where only you would ever see it." She stood in my doorway and cried, and I let her, and then she put it on, and she has worn it every day since. I check. I am not proud of that, but I check. It has been 2 years now. I am 65 years old, and I am telling you this on a Tuesday morning in my own kitchen with the sun coming across the floor and a cup of coffee going cold in my hands, which is a thing I do now, let coffee go cold because there is nobody waiting on me. Sabrina and I have coffee on Wednesdays. Just the 2 of us at the place near the library, the same one we used to go to before. It is not the same as it was. It is better in one specific way and worse in another, and I have made my peace with both. It is better because it is real. It is worse because we both know exactly what it cost, and we can both see the cost sitting there at the table with us, and I do not think that ever entirely goes away, and I have stopped expecting it to. Dale came to see me by himself in the spring. He sat in my living room with his hands between his knees and said, "Corinne, I have tried about 9 ways to start this. And then he said what you did was the worst thing that ever happened to me, and it was also the only thing that was ever going to work, and I know how that sounds. I was 36 years old and still running my life the way my mother wanted it run, and I could not see it at all. There was no version where somebody explained it to me. Somebody had to take something away from me. He said, I've got a small life now. I manage a place, I don't own it, and it's mine. And I shook the hand of the man who once said she'll sign it and thank us for letting her, and I told him I was glad, and I found somewhat to my surprise that I meant it. Vivienne and I are never going to be friends, and we both know it, and it is a great relief to both of us. We are polite. We see each other 3 or 4 times a year, and neither of us pretends. She has never apologized, and she is not going to, and I stopped needing it somewhere around the 2nd summer. Losing that house did something to her that no conversation with me could have done. She is smaller now, not humbled exactly, just smaller and quieter, and she does not hold court anymore because there is nobody left who wants to be held. Hollis and I get along fine. He asks about my knee. Yesterday was Christmas Eve. We had it at Sabrina and Dale's apartment on the north side, which has a kitchen you cannot turn around in, and a dining area that is really just the end of the living room. My grandmother's oak table would not fit through the door, so it is still in a storage unit, and Sabrina still pays for it every month, and we do not discuss it. There were 8 of us at a folding table with a cloth over it. Sabrina and Dale Hollis, and Vivienne and Nadine, and her husband, me, in a car seat. Her name is Wren. She is 14 months old, and she has Vaughn's exact eyebrows, which nobody else can see and which are unmistakable to me. I made the cornbread dressing. Nobody asked me to. I called Sabrina on the 22nd and said, I am bringing the dressing, and she said, Mom, of course you are. I started it at 5 in the morning out of habit with the cornbread stale on the sheet pan and a pound of sage sausage and 3 onions and more butter than any doctor would approve of. I stood in my kitchen in my robe at 6 o'clock, and for 1 second I put my hand out toward where somebody would have been to hit a hand that was not there, and then I laughed at myself and kept going. There was none of it left. I want to say that plainly because 2 years earlier there had been a coffee cake under plastic wrap in a refrigerator that nobody touched. Every plate came back. Hollis had thirds and was not subtle about it. Vivian had some and said, "Corinne, this is very good," and did not embellish it. And I think that was the most honest thing that woman ever said to me. And before we ate, Dale stood up in that crowded little room with a glass in his hand, and I felt my whole body go still, because the last time I heard a Rutherford give a toast, I was sitting at the end of a table 3 feet from anybody. He said, "I am going to be brief," and then he actually was. He said 2 years ago I stood up in a much nicer room and thanked everybody for a house that was not mine, that I was in the middle of trying to take from the woman who bought it. So I am going to be careful about what I say in a room from now on. He said this year, "I just want to thank Corinne, not for the house. She already took that back and she was right to." He said for teaching this family, the only thing any of us actually needed to learn, which is that love without respect is not love. It is just somebody being useful to you. And he lifted his glass and said to Corinne, and everybody at that folding table said it, including Vivian Rutherford, who lifted her glass and looked at me and said it out loud. And I sat in a room with 8 people in it, and a baby asleep in the corner, and I felt more at home than I ever felt in one single minute at 1412 Chandler Row. Because a home is not the square footage. It is not the pocket doors, and it is not the 100-year-old trees over the brick. I have had the beautiful one. I have sat at the end of the beautiful one in a navy dress and been nobody. A home is a room where when you speak somebody writes it down. After dinner, Sabrina and I were at her narrow sink doing dishes, her washing, me drying the way we did in 1998. She said, "Mom, can I ask you something?" I said, "Always." She said, "Do you regret it?" I dried a plate slowly because she deserved a real answer and not a fast one. I said no. She said, "But you lost so much money. $70,000, Mom." And I said, "Honey, I did not lose it. I paid it. There is a difference, and it is the whole difference." She said, "Paid it for what?" And I said, "For the right to be a person in my own family." She stopped washing and stood there with her hands in the water for a second. Then she said, "I regret it. Not the house. I have never once cared about the house. I regret that I had to lose you to figure out how to have you." And I said, "We did not lose each other. We just put it back together somewhere with better footing." She said, "Do you forgive me?" And I said, "I forgave you in about March, honey. Quietly and by myself. And I did not tell you because the forgiving was mine, and it was not going to fix anything for you. The part that is left is yours, and I cannot do it for you." And we finished the dishes. I want to say one last thing to whoever is still here at the end of this. If any of this sounded like your life, I want to say 4 things to you, and then I will let you go. You are not selfish for choosing yourself. You have been told that you are probably by people who benefit from you not doing it, and it is not true. You are not cruel for refusing to disappear. Refusing to disappear is the most basic thing a living creature does. You are not required to keep standing between someone and the consequences of their own choices. That is not love. That is a job, and nobody is paying you, and it is going to take everything you have. And the quiet is not the same as agreement. I want you to hear that one twice because it took me 63 years. Every time you swallow it and smile, somebody in the room is writing down that you agreed. They are keeping a record whether you like it or not. So you had better keep one too. Your worth was never in what you gave away. Your worth is that you are here, and that what happens to you matters, and that when you speak, it ought to go on the record. I sat in the corner of the room for 35 years and got down what everyone else said. I am 65 years old, and I have finally entered my own transcript, and I am not leaving it again. If this reached you, send it to a woman who is fading at her own table. I know at least one is listening. And Merry Christmas.